Chapter 2401. As he spoke, a tremendous power suddenly burst forth from within his body. This kind of power was different from any of the previous times he had released such a power. It contained a vague feeling that belonged to a concept. Under the impact of this power, the ordinary cultivators felt an indescribable pressure on their bodies and minds. The lightning was like a piece of paper that was instantly scattered. Even the dark clouds in the sky seemed to have suffered a strong backlash at this moment. They were directly blown away by an invisible impact and turned into endless smoke that spread in all directions. In the blink of an eye, they turned invisible, and only caused the sky and the public space to darken a little. Fun? At this moment, the cultivators who were paying attention to Duan Shi finally realized what he had said before. He actually called this attack that could almost destroy all of them and kill all the cultivators in the public space fun? Moreover, this kind of attack, he actually dispersed it so easily and erased it? Just how strong was this alliance master? Could it be that he was already the legendary true sage? Countless doubts appeared in the cultivators' hearts at this moment. Their expressions kept changing and it was difficult for them to calm down. At this moment, Duan Shi completely ignored them. He narrowed his eyes and the power that contained the aura of a concept that was released from his body gathered into one and poured into the light pillars that appeared out of nowhere in the public space at this moment. These light pillars were already on the verge of collapsing due to the drastic change in the public space. It was as if they were about to collapse and be destroyed in the next moment. But at this moment, as the power poured in, the pillars of light were instantly strengthened. Every single pillar of light seemed to have been bestowed with some sort of immortal attribute, and they became incomparably tough. It felt as if these light pillars would still exist even if the public space was completely destroyed. As these light pillars were given this kind of immortal attribute, Duan Shi's surface showed an inexplicable expression of relief. "Seems like it's done," he muttered, and the tremendous aura on his body began to slowly retract. Immediately after, his figure flashed and he arrived at the center of the light pillars, surrounded by them. After Duan Shi arrived, he turned to look at the crowd of cultivators and said, "These are the mission worlds that lead to the birth of new races. If you want to contribute, follow me to those mission worlds and complete the missions issued by them." As he spoke, he did not wait for the cultivators to reply. His figure flashed, and he charged into one of the light pillars. This beam of light was none other than the beam of light that extended from a position that completely overlapped with the place where the half-sage pseudo-sage cultivator had entered the mission world. Obviously, if this pillar of light could be connected to the mission world, then it should be connected to the mission world that the half-fake saint had entered. That was a world that had already been divided into 3 by 3 races. Although Duan Shi's words were spoken in a normal tone and voice, due to Duan Shi's power, his words easily spread across the entire public space, reaching the ears of the living beings who could see him, regardless of whether they had the ability to see him or not. The cultivators who were determined to follow Duan Shi no matter where he went were about to show their determination, but they discovered that Duan Shi had already entered the light pillar and disappeared without a trace. For a moment, they could not help but hold back, and their expressions were rather strange. As for the cultivators who had yet to realize what had happened, it took them a while to realize what had happened. They were all hesitant and at a loss. For a time, the living beings in the entire public space showed all kinds of emotions. Although Duan Shi did not observe the various changes behind him, he understood everything clearly. After all, no matter what, he was in existence that had controlled the Supreme Alliance for so many years. How could he not understand the human heart? However, even though he knew all this, he did not try to incite those living beings. Instead, he allowed those living beings to make their own choices. After all, saving the world and humanity was something that could only be done willingly. Even if coercion and encouragement were effective in a short period of time, there would definitely be hidden dangers in the long run. Moreover, he also believed that most living beings would be willing to give up everything to participate in this cause. In that case, he naturally did not bother to encourage them. He simply allowed them to make their own choices and act according to their own hearts. The passage that connected to the mission world was not formed by the giant tower itself. Instead, it was created by Duan Shi with the power of the public space, the power of many living beings, and his own power. Although it had already taken shape, it was still much weaker than the passage that was created by the giant tower itself. Moving forward in the passage was countless times more bumpy and dangerous than traveling to the mission world with the power of the giant tower. Along the way, even Duan Shi had to be careful to avoid the turbulence that occasionally appeared in the passage. He had to avoid all kinds of dangers that could appear in the passage at any time. As a result, the speed of his journey was naturally not fast. In fact, compared to the transmission of the giant tower, it was hundreds or thousands of times slower. Just like that, after an unknown period of time, he felt that he had broken through an extremely tough barrier and entered a wonderful world. The moment he entered the world, he felt endless restrictions being imposed on him out of nowhere. His cultivation base, his cultivation realm, and his mind were all restricted, causing everything to decrease at an unimaginable speed. At that instant, Duan Shi cried out softly. The things that he had comprehended from the few words that his teacher had told him during the past few days were triggered. A weak aura exploded from within his body and began to sweep around him. In the blink of an eye, it enveloped his body. As the aura appeared, the countless restrictions that had been imposed on him instantly collapsed. His aura began to expand and rise again. In the end, he managed to retain his cultivation realm that was close to the false saint stage. Naturally, it was much weaker than before, but compared to the requirements of this world, it was much stronger. It's indeed effective. I didn't expect Teacher's realm to be so profound. Feeling the cultivation that he had retained, Duan Shi could not help but feel an indescribable sense of awe. He had only comprehended a little bit of what his teacher had said, and he had already obtained the ability to break through the restrictions of the mission world. If his teacher was here, perhaps the entire mission world, or even the entire tower, would be incomparably fragile to him, right? After all, according to his experience, although the restrictions on cultivation in this mission world were not absolute, it was not like the missions he had encountered before, which completely suppressed his cultivation realm to the level of an ordinary person. It also suppressed his level of thinking to the level of an ordinary person, but it was not much different. If he was really affected by this world without any resistance, the cultivation that he could retain would not be much stronger than that of an ordinary person. At most, he would only be 10 times stronger than an ordinary person, but now, he could retain the cultivation realm of a false saint and have the strength of a false saint. In comparison, he was billions of times stronger. Help the new tribe build a public space? Is this my mission? Sensing the information that this world had poured into his heart, an inexplicable complicated feeling flashed through Duan Shi's heart. In fact, when he had found this mission world, or rather, when he had found the new tribe, he had not only opened this passage, but he had also used the rewards of the many missions he had completed in this tower to change some of the rules of the tower, or rather, he had added some rules to the tower. Of course, this kind of wish was only a rough one, not a specific one. He could barely make a rough wish with the remaining rewards from completing so many quests. If he wanted to make some detailed changes, then he would probably have to complete hundreds of times more quests than he did now, and accumulate all the rewards from the quests to be able to make it. The goal of his wish was for everyone in the public space to receive a mission that would restrict the new tribe in this tower after entering the mission space. They would not be able to leave, nor would they be able to discover the outside world. And now, the mission that he had received was obviously the mission that the tower had given him based on his wish. Although this mission was born from his wish, It was his first time knowing that it would end up like this and be carried out in such a way. Before this, at least before he had received this mission, he had no idea that the tower would make him carry out this mission to achieve his goal. He also had no idea what the final outcome of this mission would be for his ultimate goal. Could it be that the new tribe will completely give up exploring the outside world with the public space? Such doubts flashed through his heart, and he could not understand the meaning of this mission. Just as he was thinking to himself, strange space-time distortions suddenly appeared in this world out of nowhere. These space-time distortions were extremely strange, as if some kind of existence had rushed into this world from outside. At this moment, various invisible fluctuations appeared out of thin air in this world, gathering toward the distortions and beginning to change something. This made Duan Shi instantly understand that there were cultivators who had entered this world and were restricted by this world. They had also received the mission from the giant tower. There are hundreds of people, and they are quite fast, Duan Shi thought to himself as he looked at the fluctuations. He knew very well what was going on in the passage. The fact that hundreds of people had rushed into the passage in such a short period of time meant that at least thousands of cultivators had rushed into the passage behind him as soon as he had entered it. After all, the passage was very dangerous. Thousands of people had rushed into it, and perhaps only hundreds of them could reach their destination. 90% of them would most likely be sucked into the endless pitch-black turbulence in the giant tower. Of course, the cultivators who were sucked into the turbulence would not die just like that. In fact, they were only sucked into the turbulence to start a new round of their mission. To them, it was not much of a loss, of course, apart from Duan Shi. Perhaps not many cultivators knew about this. In their opinion, being sucked into the turbulence was equivalent to death. However, this was only temporary. When the cultivators completed their mission and returned to the public space, the misunderstanding would naturally be resolved, and there was no need for Duan Shi to explain it to them. Although I don't know the reason, I'll carry it out now. The thought flashed across Duan Shi's mind. With a flash, he quickly rushed toward a familiar aura in this world. He was a false saint, and this world was considered relatively small for him. In a flash, he had already crossed half the world and arrived at a certain mountain range in this world. When he arrived, he looked over and realized that the mountain range was quite strange. Although the entire mountain range did not seem big, there were countless extremely powerful auras hidden in it. Among these auras, some of them were even relatively huge, giving him an inexplicable pressure. There were many buildings in the entire mountain range, and many of them did not seem to be built by an ordinary civilization. He could feel various indescribable auras coming from the buildings. They seemed to belong to a civilization, but also seemed to belong to a wilderness. It felt as if the two auras had somehow fused together to form some kind of strange entity. This is the new race. At this moment, Duan Shi came to a realization. This kind of aura that was between civilization and savagery had an extremely strong impact on him. At this moment, he knew that if there was any race that could affect the status of the humans as the main character of the world, it could only be this race below him. At this moment, a strange sense swept past where he was. This strange sense was quite familiar to Duan Shi, but there was also an inexplicable sense of unfamiliarity. It felt as if a certain acquaintance had undergone some kind of change that he couldn't grasp, and this was the perception he felt. It's really you. If I knew it would develop to this point, I wouldn't have let you go back then. At this moment, Duan Shi sighed and spoke. He was originally in a hidden state, but as soon as he spoke, the hidden state was instantly broken. As the hidden state was broken, the sense that was originally searching around instantly grasped his existence and began to gather from all directions. In the blink of an eye, it had already enveloped him. Chapter 2402. Only a short period of time had passed in the public space, but millions of years had passed in this mission world. Now, the pseudo-sage had become the ancestor of the demon race, and was respected as the ancestor by the entire demon race in this world. His status was so high that it was similar to Duanshur, who controlled the Supreme Alliance back then. Over the years, he had spent most of his time nurturing the fiend race and getting them to work hard to suppress the desolate beasts. Eventually, he would wipe out all the desolate beasts in this mission world and complete his mission in this mission world. However, his comprehension of the cultivation method of the demon clan was deepening every moment. Unknowingly, he had already completely recovered his cultivation realm, and his strength had already reached the level of a half-step pseudo-saint. Moreover, at some point in time, he realized that the restrictions this mission world placed on his soul and his own realm had been completely lifted. Now, not only had his strength reached the pseudo-sage level, but his mental realm had also completely recovered to his peak state. In fact, compared to before, he had vaguely grasped the direction of a higher level. It seemed that as long as he had enough time, he would be able to directly break through the pseudo-sage level and step into the pseudo-sage level, or even higher. The pseudo-sage was confused about this change. He had no idea why this was happening. However, he vaguely felt that something was wrong. It was as if some change that he couldn't control or even didn't want to see had already happened. However, although he had this feeling, he was restricted in this mission world. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see the truth. No matter how he deduced, he couldn't deduce what had happened. Recently, he suddenly discovered that this mission world had suddenly produced all kinds of strange fluctuations. It felt as if there were powerful existences at the pseudo-sage level wreaking havoc everywhere in this world, wantonly destroying it. It also felt as if some existence had broken through time and space and entered this world. The pseudo-sage instinctively rejected the latter possibility. After all, this was a mission world built by the giant tower. It could be said to be an absolute world. Once such a mission world was opened, it would completely belong to him. Before the existence that first entered this mission world completed the mission, this mission world would be sealed off to all living beings in the outside world, no matter how powerful they were. Even if it was a false saint or an even stronger existence, it was impossible for them to rush into this mission world in such a sealed environment. What's wrong with them now? Sitting cross-legged in his cave abode, he was working hard to seek his own growth and breakthrough. His heart was filled with bewilderment. In this world, only the false sage among the wild beasts could erupt at this moment. This made him start to suspect what had happened to the wild beasts' false sages for them to suddenly go crazy. However, just as he was thinking about this, he discovered that there seemed to be a strange existence above the mountain range that he lived in. It had suddenly crossed the sky and arrived. Although he couldn't catch any trace of this strange existence, he could faintly feel the terrifying pressure coming from it. He felt that once that existence exerted its strength, he would be crushed like an ant in an instant. Upon discovering this, the half-sage couldn't help but feel extremely nervous. He released his perception and started to thoroughly investigate everything above the mountain range, searching for the existence that gave him this inexplicable pressure. Very soon, just as he focused his perception on the location where he felt the strongest, an indescribably terrifying aura suddenly appeared out of thin air. Then, a voice entered his ears. "It's really you. If I had known that things would develop to this point, I wouldn't have let you off." He was extremely familiar with this voice. It was the voice of the powerhouse that he had encountered before entering this mission world. "It's you." At this moment, he suddenly understood what had happened and couldn't help but feel shocked. As he spoke, his figure flashed and appeared in midair, appearing in front of the powerhouse. "This is my mission world. Why are you here?" Looking at Duanshur in front of him, the half-sage looked shocked and confused as he asked instinctively. Looking at the figure in front of him that seemed to have changed greatly, Duanshur, who was extremely experienced in missions, instantly knew that he had most likely reincarnated at least once. However, this was just a thought that flashed through his mind. After all, compared to the problem that he was facing now, this was just a small matter. It was not worth his attention at all. It's because what you've done has broken through the mission world and even affected the entire world. I had no choice but to pay a huge price to break into this mission world and appear in front of you, Duansher said. As he spoke, he looked at the half-sage in front of him with an inexplicable gaze. The half-sage's strength did not seem to have improved much compared to before, but he could tell at a glance that his luck was tens of thousands of times stronger than before. Back then, although his luck was not weak, it was only a few times stronger than ordinary cultivators of the same level. However, now, his luck was like a sun. Even the half-sage's luck paled in comparison. Such luck could be said to be the absolute favor of heaven and earth. In fact, no one would object to saying that he was the son of heaven and earth. With such luck, no matter what he did, the half-sage would not die. Even if he used the most extreme method to completely erase the half-sage's existence, the half-sage would eventually be resurrected due to various unbelievable coincidences and unimaginable subtle factors. In fact, the half-sage's cultivation realm might even improve greatly because of this. Perhaps the half-sage would be directly resurrected as a false sage or even a despair one. Under such circumstances, Duansher naturally did not have the mood to help the half-sage. Besides, even if he could kill the half-sage, there was no benefit in doing so now. Although the demon race was obviously born because of him, it was no longer completely because of him now. Even if he killed the half-sage, the demon race would just lose an ancestor and a powerhouse who guided them to grow. The demon race's existence was still the same. In fact, it was even more pessimistic. Perhaps because of his death, the entire demon race would no longer be restricted, and would instead develop even more rapidly. Due to these reasons, Duansher only looked at the half-sage but did not take any hostile action. "What did I do? What did I do?" the half-sage said in disbelief. He had no idea what he had done that could affect the world outside of the mission world or even the entire world. Even if he did, it was only because he had helped the public space re-establish order before entering the mission world. However, the powerhouse in front of him already knew about it and appeared to make a conclusion about what he had done. No matter what, it was impossible for him to pay a huge price to appear in front of him again, right? Seeing that the half-sage was still confused, Duansher could only sigh inwardly. At this moment, many powerhouses in the demon race below felt that something was wrong. A powerful aura erupted and a powerful force rose up in various parts of the mountain range. Immediately after, figures leaped through the void and appeared around the broken world and the half-step false divine being. Among them, there was no lack of false sages. Although the half-sage was the ancestor of the entire demon race and was regarded as the ancestor by all members of the demon race, it did not mean that he was the strongest powerhouse in the demon race. In fact, the demon race was also a complete race. For the demon race, there was also a distinction between those with good talent and those with average talent. Although the half-sage had the comprehension of his previous life, and was the creator of the demon race's cultivation system. However, his talent could only be considered above average in the entire demon race. In the demon race, there were countless terrifying existences with cultivation talent that was many times stronger than him. His talent allowed him to make breakthroughs over the years and finally become the half-sage he was today. Naturally, there were many existences whose talent was many times more terrifying than his. They became false sages before him or even went one step further and became false sages. At this moment, there were such existences among the demon race that appeared around Duansher and the half-sage. Of course, this mountain range could be said to be the ancestral land of the demon race in this world. Therefore, almost all the false sages of the demon race placed their cave abodes in this mountain range to protect this mountain range and their ancestor. It was precisely because of this that so many false sages appeared here at this time. Looking at the false sages around him, a trace of killing intent flashed through Duan Shi's heart. However, this trace of killing intent was suppressed by his rationality in the end. The birth of the killing intent was naturally because it was very likely that these demon race would compete with humans for the position of the main character of the world in the future. In the end, it would set off a terrifying calamity that would affect all living beings in the world. To him, such an outcome was obviously unacceptable. Therefore, when he saw these false sages, who were obviously the highest-ranking members of the demon race, appear here, he naturally had killing intent. As for the chance to kill them, it was the same as not killing the half-sage previously. There was no point in killing them at all. These false sages were indeed important to the demon race in this world. Perhaps killing them would be enough to cause the demon race in this world to collapse and allow him to easily clean up all the demon race in this world. However, this was only in this world. With the luck of the demon race, even if he killed them, the demon race would not go extinct. Instead, they would be reborn in other mission worlds. In fact, due to the pressure there, they would even grow quite a bit. In this way, killing them was obviously an action that did not make up for the losses. Duan Shi naturally would not choose such a foolish thing. At this moment, the half-sage reacted and hurriedly said to the surrounding demons, "This is my friend. You don't have to worry." However, he knew very well how terrifying this powerhouse in front of him was. Although the demons that he had nurtured were much stronger than him, compared to this powerhouse in front of him, they were merely ants. If he really angered this powerhouse, all the hard work that he had nurtured over the years would probably be destroyed. Although the demons were all much stronger than this half-sage, they still treated this half-sage like they were facing their own parent. Hearing his words, all of them were stunned. They lowered their guard and put away the various abilities and treasures that they had prepared. In an instant, the world became clear again. The destructive aura that filled the world completely disappeared without a trace. "Since you're the Patriarch's friend, we won't disturb you anymore." One by one, they bowed to the half-sage and expressed their apologies to Duan Shi before descending and returning to their cave abode. Seeing that they had left, the half-sage heaved a sigh of relief. As expected, "You're no longer a human." Duan Shi could not help but sigh when he saw the half-sage's behavior. Although the half-sage had spoken up to avoid conflict with the demon race. However, his words were more on the side of the demon clan. He was worried that Duan Shi would kill all the demons. It could be said that Duan Shi's side had naturally shifted to the demon race and was no longer on the human side. Hearing this, the half-sage was stunned. He did not know why Duan Shi would care so much about his attitude. "Isn't it fine as long as my actions are correct? Why does he care about the slight change in my stance? This is simply a hipster, of course." These were just thoughts that flashed through his mind. He knew that this was not the time to be thinking about this. After all, he was in midair and it was inconvenient to stay here. Not only was it inconvenient to say anything, but it would also cause a misunderstanding. Although he had managed to persuade those demons to leave, it was only temporary. Perhaps if his conversation with that powerhouse did not go well, his subordinates would start to get scared and erupt again. By then, things would be irreversible. He immediately said, "This is not a good place to talk. Why don't you have a seat in my cave abode?" Hearing this, Duan Shi frowned and thought about it. He nodded and said, "Sure. Some things indeed need to be discussed properly." Chapter 2403. Duan Shi could not help but sigh when he arrived at the half-pseudo-saint cave abode. The extravagance of the cave abode was beyond his imagination. Almost every rune, every line, and every bit of decoration was the work of a fake sage. Moreover, the fake saint had paid a great price to set it up. It might take thousands or even tens of thousands of years for the fake saint to recover. Cultivating in such a cave abode was equivalent to cultivating in the most perfect holy land for cultivation. Even a pig could definitely grow into an incredible powerhouse after cultivating here for a long time. However, this half-pseudo-saint was still unable to break through to the half-pseudo-saint realm after cultivating in such a place for such a long time. He was still the same half-pseudo-saint that Duan Shi had seen in the past. How could he not sigh? After sitting down, Duan Shi looked at the half-pseudo-saint and sighed. It seems like you're not completely clueless, right? Hearing this, the half-pseudo-saint was slightly shocked, and a hint of confusion appeared on his face. Then, this trace of confusion turned into horror. Panic appeared in the depths of his eyes, and his voice became strangely dry. So, if I don't accept my new identity, I really won't be able to get promoted anymore? The monsters under him did not know that the opportunity to break through to the half-pseudo-saint realm had already appeared hundreds of thousands of years ago. If he had wanted to, he could have become a true false sage long ago. In fact, he could have even made great strides forward and directly crossed a few realms. Becoming a false sage was not impossible. However, that opportunity was not something that the half-pseudo-saint was willing to accept. That was because he could clearly feel that if he used that opportunity to become a pseudo-saint, he would become a monster from then on. Even if he left this world and this giant tower, he would never be able to restore his race and become a human again. Before this choice appeared, he never knew that he valued his identity as a human so much. When this choice appeared in front of him, only then did he know that the difficulty of making this choice was actually much more difficult than he had imagined. It felt as if it was as difficult for him to completely abandon everything about himself, completely crush himself, and then reassemble himself. It even made him suspect that if he made this choice, he would no longer be himself from then on. It was precisely because of this that he hadn't made a decision for hundreds of thousands of years, and he hadn't made a true breakthrough. Duan Shi's gaze softened a little when he heard this. Although he was the one who had caused the crisis of the entire human race and caused the world to once again fall into the danger of a calamity, Duan Shi's expression softened a little. However, this was clearly not his true intention. The fact that he was still so conflicted at the critical juncture of a breakthrough and cared so much about his identity as a human had already gained his approval. This made him feel that there was still a reason for this pseudo-sage cultivator to be forgiven for having such a mentality. Noticing that Duan Shi's gaze towards him had changed slightly, the half-pseudo-saint smiled bitterly. At this moment, he didn't have the mood to care about Duan Shi's opinion of him. He was only worried about what choice he should make. Breaking through was the most fundamental goal of all cultivators who embarked on the path of cultivation. For cultivators, this kind of goal should be able to suppress everything else, including all emotions. However, at this moment, when faced with the choice of abandoning his own race, he couldn't make up his mind no matter what. This made him extremely displeased with his hesitation, and it made him extremely angry that he couldn't make such a simple decision. However, the true thoughts in his heart couldn't be changed after all. Even if he kept cursing and getting angry at himself, his heart was still his heart. After all, he couldn't change the true feelings in his heart, nor could he go against his true thoughts. Human. Monster. He murmured for a long time before sighing. In the end, he still couldn't make up his mind. The human race and the monster race in this world were extremely special. It was essentially different from the division between human race and monster race in other worlds. In other worlds, human race specifically referred to living beings who were born with the appearance of a born Taoist body. On the other hand, the monster race was not born with the appearance of a born Taoist body. Through cultivation, they obtained that kind of body and that kind of appearance. If this division was used, the human race in this world would be reduced by tens of thousands of times. In fact, the division between human race and monster race was not so narrow in this world. In this world, human race referred to the living beings who eventually obtained the born Taoist body in the outside world. In other words, the living beings with the appearance of 3 eyes and 4 elbows, regardless of whether they were born with this appearance or obtained this appearance through cultivation or transformation, they were all human race. In contrast, the division between the monster race and monster race was different. The monster race specifically referred to the newly born wild beasts in this giant tower. They were a race that had also obtained the born Taoist body. On the surface, this monster race could actually be called the human race in this world. After all, the human race in this world originally encompassed an extremely wide range of races. It was possible to forcefully divide the monster race into that category, however, it was obvious that this was only on the surface. Fundamentally speaking, there was still an essential difference between the monster race and the human race. That was, the original bodies of the monster race were formed from the endless karma and evil aura that existed in this world. Don't forget that this giant tower was built to purify the endless evil aura in this world. The many mission worlds in this giant tower were not created just to test the cultivators. Rather, they were created to give the cultivators some benefit. Instead, through the method of this mission world, the boundless karma and baleful aura in this huge tower could be transformed into another form, another specific form for the cultivators to kill and deal with, and finally achieve the result of purifying the baleful aura. In this mission world, the wild beasts were clearly in this position. Therefore, the living beings that were transformed from the wild beasts were equivalent to the living beings transformed from the karma and evil aura. Compared to all the living beings that were born in the outside world, these living beings were fundamentally different. It could even be said that they were the complete opposite. In this way, it was clearly not appropriate to regard this creature, who also seemed to possess a connate Taoism aptitude, as a human. It was precisely because of this that many cultivators instinctively classified them as a race that was completely different from the human race. They also regarded them as a race that was about to compete with the human race for the title of the protagonist of this world. In reality, if one looked at the monster race from the perspective of this world, the monster race was more suitable to be the protagonist of this world than the human race. After all, the monster race was formed from the endless karma and evil aura that had accumulated in this world. The more monsters there were, the less karma and evil aura in this world would be. If the number of monsters in this world exceeded a certain limit at a certain moment, and the endless karma and evil aura that had accumulated in this world were completely transformed, the world would no longer have a trace of karma and evil aura. At that time, the world would naturally be eternally free of tribulations. At the very least, there would no longer be tribulations caused by the karma and evil aura. From this point of view, the monster race was, of course, more suitable to be the protagonist of this world than the human race. However, it was obvious that the human race was not the world. From the perspective of the world, the monster race was indeed more suitable to be the protagonist. However, from the perspective of the human race, this was clearly not something that they were willing to accept. If the monster race became the protagonist of this world, wouldn't the human race become a second-class race? In that case, would it not be inconvenient for the human race to completely lose the resources and quantity that only the protagonist of this world could occupy and possess? By that time, the human race would only gradually wither away and eventually disappear from this world. As long as one was a human, they would never accept such a situation. Even Duan Shi was the same. Duan Shiji could only vaguely sense it, but he wasn't sure about the specifics. However, to him, no matter how many benefits the monster race would bring to this world, he would never give up fighting against the monster race. He would never think that the human race needed to give up their position as the protagonist of this world. After all, he was a human. It seems like that's the case now. Back then, I only thought that your luck was very special, but I didn't expect that you would become the ancestor of the monster race and become the enemy of all humans, Duan Shi said calmly as he looked at the half-pseudo-saint. His voice was filled with sorrow, and there was an inexplicable killing intent in it. At this moment, the half-pseudo-saint was so shocked that he did not know what expression to make. Me? The enemy of humans? At this moment, his body could not help but tremble. Lightning flashed in his heart, and he felt as if a world had completely collapsed in his heart. In fact, the power in his body was in an inexplicable chaos at this moment. An extremely powerful aura began to seep out of his body, causing the space-time outside his body to become chaotic. Although this cave abode was built by many false saints for their ancestor, as the half-pseudo-saint was their ancestor, they naturally could not leave any backups in this cave abode. After the cave abode was built, it was completely handed over to the half-pseudo-saint and was completely under the half-pseudo-saint's control. Therefore, at this moment, even though the half-pseudo-saint had fallen into an inexplicable chaos and was on the verge of chi deviation, none of the false saints outside the cave abode sensed it. It was the same even though there were so many people who set up the cave abode. Although they were nervous about the changes in the cave abode and worried that something would happen to their ancestor, they could only watch from afar. None of them dared to extend their senses in. Duan Shi ignored the half-pseudo-saint and did not interfere with the half-pseudo-saint's chaos. Although it was just a matter of a thought for him to suppress the half-pseudo-saint's current chaos, after all, the half-pseudo-saint had already become the ancestor of the demon race and had become the person with the highest status in a race that was a huge threat to the human race. Although he could not attack him due to the overall situation, he would not be so kind as to help him solve the problem. If the half-pseudo-saint died just like that, he would only be happy and not feel sad. Even if it was very likely to bring him a lot of trouble, unfortunately, although the half-pseudo-saint's cultivation realm was tens of thousands of times lower than Duan Shi's, he was still a half-pseudo-saint after all and was also the ancestor of the demon race. Soon, the moment the chaos in his body reached a certain limit, he suddenly woke up and regained control of his power, his cave abode, and his mind. In the blink of an eye, he had completely calmed down. His entire person looked the same as before, and there was nothing unusual about him. After doing that, he let out a long breath and smiled bitterly. It seems like Senior really wants me dead. Of course. Duan Shi was a little disappointed. The half-pseudo-saint could only smile bitterly again at his natural behavior. After a while he asked, "Is the demon race really that dangerous?" "That's right. Although the luck of the demon race is still very weak now, its potential is so strong that it surpasses all the races that I've seen before. In fact, it even surpasses the humans," Duan Shi said without hesitation as he looked at the half-pseudo-saint who had an extremely serious expression. Hearing this, the half-pseudo-saint was slightly shocked. His emotions became extremely complicated at this moment. There was a sense of panic and an inexplicable sense of pride. He was panicking because the demon race could actually threaten the status of humans and make humans disappear from this world. On the other hand, he was proud that a race that he had casually created had such a potential that it could actually threaten humans. This complicated state of mind caused his expression to become slightly distorted. He even faintly felt that the power in his body was about to become chaotic once again. Fortunately, the half-pseudo-saint already had previous experience. At this moment, he quickly regained control of his emotions and calmed down. "Kill me. After that, kill all the demon race in this world. I don't think it will be too difficult for Senior to do this. In this way, humans will no longer be threatened." After a long time, the half-pseudo-saint said to Duan Shi with difficulty. Although it was just an ordinary sentence, it seemed like he had used up all his strength. He felt like all the strength in his body had been sucked out. Hearing this, Duan Shi could not help but tremble slightly. He looked at the half-pseudo-saint in shock. He did not expect that the half-pseudo-saint would actually say such words. One must know that if Duan Shi did as he said, he would be directly erased. Not a single trace of him would be left. Chapter 2404. The martial ancestor beast let out a sigh and said, "Senior, don't worry, I've already thought it through. Please do as you wish, Senior." Duan Shi could not help but feel shocked when he saw the martial ancestor beast's resolution. Although it was difficult for an ordinary person to have the resolution to sacrifice themselves for the sake of the bigger picture, it was still relatively easy for them to do so. After all, an ordinary person's lifespan was only 100 years, which was extremely short. Even if they did not sacrifice themselves, they would at most live for a few decades. Relatively speaking, it was easier for them to convince themselves to sacrifice themselves. However, for cultivators who could live forever, the cost of sacrificing themselves was not just a few decades. It was tens of millions of years, or even billions of years. The resolution required was at least 10 million times stronger than the resolution required for an ordinary person to sacrifice themselves. Now, the martial ancestor beast, who had caused the birth of the monster race and threatened the main character of the human world, had displayed such a strong resolution in front of Duan Shi. How could he not be shocked? After a long while, Duan Shi let out a sigh and said, "I understand your resolution. Unfortunately, if this could solve the problem, I wouldn't have waited for you to ask for it." The martial ancestor beast was slightly startled. He was disappointed but also slightly relieved. He was disappointed because the solution he came up with did not work, but he was relieved because he did not have to die, at least. He did not have to die for now. One had to know that sacrificing oneself was not an ordinary kind of resolution. Even though he had condensed this resolution with his own strong will, the fear of death and the fear of losing everything still existed. It was just that his will was forcefully suppressing it. Under such circumstances, when he suddenly heard that he did not have to die, even if it was at the cost of worsening the overall situation, he naturally felt like he had just escaped from death. In that case, he would naturally feel slightly relieved. Duan Shi clearly saw the change in the martial ancestor beast's emotions. The difference in strength was no longer a secret to the martial ancestor beast. That being said, he did not look down on the martial ancestor beast. On the contrary, he felt that the martial ancestor beast was becoming more powerful. After all, it was normal for people to be afraid of death. The martial ancestor beast's reaction indicated that he had come up with the resolution despite the strong fear of death. It was not because he was born without fear of death. "I see. So, what should we do now?" The martial ancestor beast let out a sigh. Duan Shi collected his thoughts and said, "This is the reason why I paid such a huge price to enter this mission world." He did not waste any time and told the martial ancestor beast his thoughts. The martial ancestor beast had proven that he was standing on the side of humans, thus he could be trusted. Therefore, it was not inappropriate for him to tell the martial ancestor king his plan. In the future, the demon ancestor might change his position to the demon race because of the change in his status. There was nothing wrong with knowing his plan. After all, even though his plan was to suppress the demon clan, it was not a bad thing for the demon clan overall. The ancestor of Out A's martial T Wu race. T to the martial of A to Tut. A full-scale war that could endanger the entire world and cause the extinction of all living beings in this world would not only affect humans, but also the demon clan. The human race might go extinct because of this. The demon race might also go extinct because of this. In this way, even if the demon ancestor changed his position to that of the demon race in the future and no longer stood on the side of humans like he did now, there was no need to worry that it would have a negative impact on the entire plan after he found out about this. It was because of these considerations that Duan Shi was being so honest. Of course, part of it was also because he was moved by the demon race's resolution just now. Hearing Duan Shi's arrangement, the demon progenitor could not help but struggle. After the war could be avoided, he began to consider the interests of the demon race. After all, this was a race that he had guided. Who would believe that he had no feelings for this race? Confining the demon clan in the giant tower, and limiting their knowledge of heaven and earth was undoubtedly beneficial to both humans and the demon clan on a macro level. But specifically speaking, the demon clan had sacrificed more. As the ancestor of the demon clan, how could he not feel conflicted? However, it was obvious that this was the only feasible solution. At the very least, even if he was enlightened, the only solution that the demon progenitor could think of that would cause the least damage to the demon race was the solution that Duan Shi had proposed. Therefore, even though he was conflicted, the demon progenitor could only sigh and agree to Duan Shi's suggestion. The moment the demon progenitor made up his mind and nodded in agreement, a crisp and tiny cracking sound suddenly came from his heart, as if an invisible barrier had suddenly collapsed out of thin air. Along with the sound, the demon progenitor's cultivation realm that was originally restricted to the half-pseudo-sacred stage began to rise endlessly. In an instant, he broke through the half-pseudo-sacred stage and stepped into the first stage pseudo-sacred stage. Following that, his luck flourished. Endless mysterious information was continuously produced from the entire mission world, pouring into his heart and merging with his memory. Endless power was born out of thin air in his body. The combination of the two caused his cultivation realm to rise rapidly. The bottlenecks between the pseudo-sacred stage became as fragile as a piece of paper. In just a few breaths of time, the demon progenitor had already risen by 9 stages and reached the peak of the 9th stage pseudo-sacred stage. Along with this change, the cave abode that was constructed by many pseudo-sacred stage instantly underwent various indescribable changes. The space-time inside the cave abode began to expand wildly, and all kinds of indescribable power were produced out of thin air. Endless laws materialized at this moment, making it seem like the place had suddenly become a demonstration of laws. The mysteries of the various laws that were originally hidden, as well as the mysteries of the Great Tao, were revealed without any concealment. At the same time, a vast and unparalleled aura seeped out of the demon progenitor's body, distorting the surrounding space-time, making it seem like there were endless space-time constantly being born and destroyed around his body. All of these changes were so intense that Duan Shi had no choice but to use some means to eliminate the impact that was invading him so that he would not end up in a sorry state. Do you feel guilty towards the demon race? An inexplicable sigh flashed through Duan Shi's heart. His insight and knowledge were many times greater than that of ordinary expert. At this moment, he could see the root cause of the changes that had happened to the demon progenitor at a glance. It was obvious that the demon progenitor felt guilty towards the demon race because of his previous decision. In the end, he had completely accepted his identity as a member of the demon race, or rather, the demon progenitor. This acceptance and acknowledgement had eliminated the obstacles that had shackled his cultivation realm and prevented him from breaking through. This caused the foundation that he had accumulated over a long period of time to flourish crazily, causing his cultivation realm to continuously rise and break through in a short period of time, directly reaching the peak of the pseudo-saint stage. At this moment, the demon progenitor's breakthrough had not stopped. He had only stopped for a few breaths at the peak of the pseudo-saint stage. After a few breaths, he had already broken through the barrier between the pseudo-saint stage and the pseudo-saint stage. His aura had increased by tens of thousands of times in the blink of an eye, and his entire body seemed to have completely melted away, directly merging into this mission world. In the blink of an eye, he seemed to have completely disappeared, but also seemed to have become omnipresent. This was obviously because he had broken through and become a pseudo-saint. Moreover, he was a pseudo-saint with the entire mission world as his foundation. At this moment, in the public space inside the giant tower, all sorts of indescribable cracking sounds rang out of nowhere, echoing in the ears of all the cultivators in the public space. Following this sound, the entire public space seemed to have lost something, but it also seemed to have broken free from some shackles, yet it also seemed like nothing had changed. That person is dead? The quasi-saint, who had been at odds with the half-step pseudo-saint stage of the demon progenitor's previous life, reacted extremely quickly. He instantly made a judgment in his heart, and his expression became rather strange. However, he could sense that the subtle aura that had originally filled the entire public space that he was extremely unhappy with had disappeared without a trace. Although the order of the entire public space was still the same, it gave him a completely different feeling. For a moment the quasi-saint felt a little lost, but he muttered, "He's finally dead." Duansher naturally did not care about the changes in the public space at this moment. At this moment, he only sighed inexplicably. The demon progenitor had now used this mission world as his foundation to become a pseudo-saint. This allowed him to have unlimited power in this mission world, to the point of being almost omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. However, at the same time, this also made it difficult for him to leave this mission world. If this mission world was destroyed, not only would he fall from the pseudo-saint stage, but he would also be severely injured. Unless his realm increased again in the future and he could break through the shackles and transfer the pseudo-saint foundation to himself, he would forever be shackled by this mission world. Obviously, breaking through the shackles and transferring the foundation was not as simple as he thought. Although Duansher could break through easily back then, in reality, ordinary cultivators would need at least 1,000,000,000,000 years to break through this shackle. In other words, if there were no other fortuitous encounters, the demon progenitor would be shackled in this mission world for at least 1,000,000,000,000 years. If it was in other worlds, 1,000,000,000,000 years was naturally nothing. However, one should not forget that this mission world was a world that was randomly born in the giant tower. It was already considered rare for such a world to be able to last for tens of millions of years. 1,000,000,000,000 years was already tens of thousands of times longer than the lifespan of a normal mission world. It could be said that using this mission world as a foundation to become a pseudo-saint had almost completely cut off his path of retreat. Of course, compared to the demon race and wild beasts that used a small area in this world to become a pseudo-saint, the demon progenitor was countless times stronger. At the very least, those false saints and wild beasts could only have the ability to be omniscient, omnipotent, and omniscient when they became a pseudo-saint. However, he could have this ability in the entire mission world. While Duansher was thinking about all these, space-time changed, and a figure gradually condensed. It was the demon progenitor who had already become a pseudo-saint. At this moment, he was completely different from before. His entire body was surrounded by a kind of eternity, immortality, omniscience, and omnipotence. Vaguely, even Duansher felt like he was suppressed by him. "This is a pseudo-saint," the demon progenitor muttered. There seemed to be endless information in his eyes, and endless light and shadows flickered. The light of wisdom in the depths of his eyes was extremely pure and deep. Vaguely, he could even see the light and shadow of the entire mission world in his eyes. "Even the mission has changed. Looks like my identity is completely that of the demon race in the eyes of the world." After a long time, he suddenly sighed. There was a sense of loss on his face, but there was also an inexplicable gain. At this moment, his mission had completely changed. It had changed from cleaning the world to leading the demon race to transcend the mission world. "Has your decision changed after accepting your identity as a demon?" Duansher looked at the demon progenitor quietly and said calmly. Hearing this, the demon progenitor sighed and said, "How can I change my mind? To the demon race, war is also not a good thing. If it can eliminate war, I naturally can't object." "That's good. Now that you know the situation of the entire world, let's start quickly." Duansher nodded. The demon progenitor's answer was not out of his expectations. The demon progenitor nodded. At this moment, the entire world had indeed entered the night before the storm. Many cultivators that entered the mission world were already carrying out various missions in the mission world. They were either dealing with the demon race, dealing with the wild beasts, or even directly attacking humans. At this moment, although the world had not fallen into chaos, it was only temporary. If they did not take any action, the world would soon become a battlefield. Following these words, the demon progenitor waved his hand, causing the cave to instantly collapse and disappear without a trace, as if it had never existed in the first place. When the surrounding demon race members noticed this, they were all extremely shocked. Those with sharp senses realized what was going on, and an indescribable joy surged in their hearts. Patriarch has become a pseudo-saint. This thought echoed in their hearts, causing them to be inexplicably excited. They felt an indescribable joy suddenly surging into their hearts, causing them to tremble uncontrollably. Chapter 2405. When the demon race in the giant tower finally patched up the last flaw, Luo Fan had already fallen into a deep sleep in the incomparably mysterious place where the will of heaven and earth was located. Be it himself or the light of heaven and earth, neither of them moved at this moment. Instead, they remained in the state they were hundreds of years ago, in the process of continuously controlling more and more light shadows. It felt as if a pause button had been pressed on the time that could affect him and the light of heaven and earth. At this moment, a wisp of mysterious willpower had already transformed into an extremely subtle state, fusing into the endless light and shadows in the surroundings. Vaguely, there seemed to be some kind of extremely obscure connection spreading out from one of the shadows, connecting to his body. In the light shadow, there was only an incomparably majestic black tower that seemed to be able to support the heavens and earth. Obviously, it was the giant tower formed by the boundless baleful aura and karma force in the center of the world. It was also the solution that Luo Fan had arranged to eliminate the tribulations that might be born in this world. If one were to observe carefully, they would discover that the thing that had some kind of obscure connection with Luo Fan was this giant tower. At the same time, the strand of will that had fused with the glowing silhouette enveloped the huge tower like a mist. If the living beings who had seen the new providence appear in this giant tower could see this scene, they would discover that the will that shrouded the giant tower was exactly the same as the providence they had sensed. Whether it was the distribution, thickness, or even the characteristics, there was almost no difference. Going deeper into the giant tower, in the mission worlds where the demon race existed, there were also traces of willpower at this time. These wills were like the giant tower, shrouding a certain area in the mission world. Or it could be said that they were closely connected to a certain living being, or wrapped around the living being, or hovering above the living being's head, covering the sky and covering the sun. In the mission worlds where the demon ancestor was, the amount of this will was the most. At least, compared to the other mission worlds, the amount of will added up was several times more. Apart from this light projection, Luo Fan's will had a similar performance in the many other light projections, enveloping all living beings and races. Clearly, it had the same behavior as luck. Or rather, it had completely transformed into the fate of those creatures, civilizations, and races. Under the influence of this providence, the behavior patterns of all living beings in and out of the giant tower all changed correspondingly. Although it wasn't a marionette, it had the same effect as a marionette. Although these karmic fates were completely formed by Luo Fan's will, since they were complete karmic fates, it was naturally impossible for them to all be harmonious and amiable. There were still all kinds of conflicts, all kinds of targeting, and even irreconcilable hatred. As a result, under the influence of the fate, chaos mixed with order began to erupt everywhere in the world. The entire world seemed to have entered an indescribable chaos. As a result, the fates of the living beings affected by karmic fates changed greatly. The living beings that were originally at the bottom turned the tables because of the burst of karmic fate. In an extremely short period of time, they grew into powerful experts and easily crushed the experts that were originally high and mighty. As for the existences that were originally at the top, because of the decline of karmic fates, they were unlucky everywhere. In the end, they plummeted and even died without a burial place. Of course, not everything was decided by karmic fate. Among them, there were some with powerful karmic fates that failed for some reason. There were also some with weak karmic fates that succeeded due to the intertwining of various factors, reversing the outcome set by karmic fate. During this process, countless mysterious and subtle information was transmitted to his heart through the karmic fates, or rather, Luo Fan's will. It set off even more intense waves in his heart from it. There were traces of subtle comprehension that gradually condensed and took shape in the depths of his heart. However, it was only the beginning after all. This kind of subtle comprehension was only in its embryonic form. It would still take an extremely long time for it to truly condense and take shape. Although it had been billions of years since the tower was erected, the living beings in the tower had experienced countless years. In reality, to the outside world, it had only been around 1,000 years since the tower was erected. Even for ordinary cultivators who had just obtained a bit of extraordinary power, this amount of time was not considered long, let alone Luo Fan, who was already a tribulation stage powerhouse. It could be said that this period of time was only about the blink of an eye for him. Even if he had an extraordinary temperament and comprehension ability that surpassed the imagination of all existences, it was impossible for him to completely perfect the method that he had thought of in a flash of inspiration over the past few centuries in such a short period of time. Therefore, at this moment, the result of turning his will into the karmic fates of living beings, civilizations, and races was still vague. It could only be regarded as an embryonic form at most. However, even this embryonic form was already a great encouragement for him. It even made him give up on his original plan to completely control this part of the world with the help of the heaven and earth light. Instead, he decided to see what he would gain after the method was truly completed. It was naturally impossible for the living beings in this world to know about the changes that were hidden in the residence of the heaven and earth will. Even Duan Shi was still far away from that level. It was even more impossible for him to know that his current efforts were related to that place. Duan Shi could clearly see the ancestral monster's fates, the monster race's fates, and the human's fates. However, he could not see his own fates at all. At this moment, he did not notice that his body was shrouded by fates that were not inferior to the ancestral monsters. This providence formed an extremely strange relationship with the demon ancestor's providence. It seemed to be constantly colliding with the demon ancestor's providence, crushing each other, but also supporting and supporting each other. It vividly displayed the legendary love-hate relationship. It could be said that if he could see his own fates, he would know that the ancestral monster's growth depended on him, and the extent of his growth depended on the ancestral monster's fates to a large extent. Of course, that was just an if. The fates that were formed from Luo Fan's will were not ordinary fates. If it were ordinary fates, although it also had the characteristic of looking at others but not itself, Duan Shi could still find a way to bypass it with his ability. However, since it came from Luo Fan's will, then this kind of luck was no longer something that could be bypassed by an existence who was many levels lower than Luo Fan. Therefore, Duan Shi was confused about all this and could not figure out the truth behind it at all. As for the ancestral monster, although he was already a false sage that relied on this mission world to exist, he was still a few levels lower than Duan Shi. In this way, he naturally could not see through Duan Shi's fates, let alone his own fate. He could only vaguely sense the monster race's fate. However, these feelings were enough to make him feel indescribably shocked. To him, this luck, which was full of vitality and shocking potential, was like placing a sun in front of an ordinary person. Just sensing it was enough for him to instantly understand Duan Jie's worries. The sliver of displeasure that originally existed in his heart had already completely disappeared. In an instant, a cooperative emotion emerged from the depths of his heart. As Duan Shi's attitude changed, the entire mission world began to undergo earth-shattering changes. The monster race that was originally extremely restrained and content with their own corner began to bare their fangs to the entire mission world, and began to release their hidden power without restraint. Be it the dire beasts or humans, they all suffered a huge impact during this process. The monster race's territory began to expand rapidly, continuously increasing, while the territories of the other two races began to shrink gradually, becoming smaller and smaller. Naturally, the two races could not accept this kind of oppression obediently. At that moment, one war after another began to break out in various parts of this mission world. The other cultivators who entered this mission world also participated. Some of them stood on the side of the monster race, some stood on the side of the human race, and some stood on the side of the dire beast. They participated in this war that spread throughout the entire mission world in a way that had almost no sense of self, completing one mission after another given to them by this mission world. In the process of this mission, the battle between the three races became more and more intense. The scale of the war became larger and larger. At first, it was just a war between living beings below the itinerant immortal realm. As time passed, the level of the living beings participating in the war became higher and higher. From itinerant immortal realm to itinerant immortal realm, then to perfected immortal realm, then to golden immortal realm, and finally to primordial pure yang realm. In this way, after thousands of years in this mission world, the participants had already reached the false saint stage. And when the level of the participants reached this level, the three sides of the war had already become two-sided. The human race, a race without a false saint, was eventually wiped out in the battle even with the help of many cultivators. They were all sent out of this mission world. That's right, they were not wiped out, but sent out of this world. After thousands of years of fighting and the conflicts of many cultivator missions, the nature of this mission world had unknowingly changed. At some point in time, it had already begun to break away from the shackles of the mission world and had a hint of the charm of a public space. And this kind of public space made this mission world able to connect with other mission worlds, allowing some powerhouses to open up channels to other mission worlds through various means. As for the human race, with the help of the false saint stage cultivators, they opened up channels to other mission worlds, and all the survivors left this mission world. With the departure of the human race, the situation in this mission world changed from the original war between the three countries to the Chu and Han dynasties. The battle between the demon race and the dire beasts became even more intense and cruel than before. If the entire mission world was not supported by the world breaker, just the battle between the false saints would have been enough to cause this mission world to collapse tens of thousands of times. And even with the support of the world breaker, this mission world was no longer as calm and stable as before. Instead, it was like a small boat in a storm, constantly on the verge of collapse. All the living beings in this mission world, be it the dire beasts or the demon race, were constantly worried about whether they would be able to survive the next moment. Under such circumstances, the attraction of this mission world to the demon race and the dire beasts was involuntarily reduced. If there were no other mission worlds, they would definitely have to renegotiate and control the scale of the war to prevent each other from dying together. However, now that there were other mission worlds, and even the human race had been driven out and entered other mission worlds, they naturally were no longer afraid that this mission world would be destroyed. At least, this worry would not suppress their hatred for each other. Facing such a situation, the battle between them did not stop because of the storm in this mission world. Instead, they became more and more desperate. At this point, there were not many cultivators left in this mission world. Only a few high-level pseudo-saints and cultivators above the pseudo-saints remained in this mission world. They stood on the side of the wild beasts or the demon race to complete the missions issued by this mission world, or rather, the missions given to them by Dwanshur through this giant tower. After all, in such a situation where even the false saints were participating in the war, other cultivators did not have the ability to participate at all. On this day, at the highest command center of the demon race, The demon ancestor said to Duan Shi with a complicated expression, "Seems like it's about time." At this moment, Duan Shi sat quietly beside him, and his presence had been restrained to the extreme. Even the demon ancestor would not have been able to discover his existence if he had not known that he was here long ago. Hearing the demon ancestor's words, Duan Shi nodded calmly and said, "It's indeed about time. After preparing for so many years and digging so many traps, the outcome will depend on what happens next." At this moment, there were still several false saints of the demon race below them. However, they did not react to the conversation between the demon ancestor and Duan Shi at all, as if they could not hear their conversation at all. Chapter 2406. The actions of the demons began to change according to the orders of the demon ancestor. Generally speaking, they were still suppressing the dire beasts and trying to wipe them out like before. However, on a deeper level, the attacks were no longer uniform. Instead, they were focused and relaxed. While they were focused and relaxed, the dire beasts were mobilized unknowingly. The powerhouses among them began to gather in a certain location in this world. This was also because the preparations of the demons were perfect and they had the help of many foreign cultivators. In addition, the intelligence of the dire beasts was higher than that of the dire beasts. This was why things could develop so perfectly and almost completely achieve the goal that the demon ancestor wanted. In the end, the powerhouses among the dire beasts gathered in a mountain range. Of course, to the demons, this was the result of their coercion. However, to the dire beasts, this was the result of their own choice. It's already in place. This thought flashed through the demon ancestor's mind as he sensed the movements of the dire beast. He had already considered all kinds of struggles and considerations before making a decision. At this critical juncture, he naturally could not hesitate anymore. At that moment, he instantly activated the many preparations he had made in this mission world over the years. For a moment, the entire mission world shook. The wind and clouds surged in the void, and clouds and mist filled the sky. The entire world seemed to be shrouded by some kind of indescribable fog. The nomological laws of this world began to jump crazily, changing at an unimaginable speed. The mission world, which had originally only had small openings, suddenly seemed to have turned into a sieve. Countless holes appeared in the depths of the nomological laws of this world, and countless auras from other worlds poured into this world, causing this world to be completely different from before in the blink of an eye. In the mountain range where the dire beasts had condensed, the entire mountain range collapsed instantly. Space-time turned into fragments that merged into the fog in the sky like smoke, causing the fog there to become denser. Roar! Furious roars could be heard from the collapsed mountain range. An incomparably massive aura soared into the sky and suppressed the void, wanting to suppress the mountain range again. These were obviously the false sages among the dire beasts unleashing their might. However, how could the situation that they had prepared for so long and even sacrificed so many demons to set up be destroyed so easily? At this moment, many false sages of the demon race took action. Rays of light, runes, and strange lines began to appear around the mountain range. They began to twist and revolve rapidly before finally converging into all sorts of unimaginable power, forming a powerful barrier that completely sealed the mountain range within. The waves of power released from the wasteland beast fake sage seemed to have encountered an absolute obstruction during this process, causing the barrier to tremble continuously. However, it was unable to break through the barrier at all and reach the outside of the barrier, reacting to the entire mission world. There were not many desolate beasts in the mountain range, but they were the strongest desolate beasts in the entire world. As long as they got rid of them, the desolate beasts in this world would no longer be a threat to the demon clan. From now on, the demon race would monopolize this world. At that time, if they wanted to transform this mission world and turn it into a completely different space, it would depend on their own abilities, and there would be no external obstacles. This mountain range was located in the area where the false sages of the wild beasts were residing. In other words, they could still unleash the strength of a false sage here. They would not be able to unleash their peak strength because they had left the area where they were residing. In fact, it was precisely because of this that they dared to gather here. At this moment, how could the false sages of the wild beasts not understand that something was wrong? They immediately struggled frantically and unleashed the power of their false sages crazily. They had even reached the point where they did not care about the lives of the other desolate beasts around them. Rays of light, waves of power, and infinite power surged crazily and continuously pounced on the barrier, the collapsing void, and the chaotic nomological laws. They wanted to stop the situation from developing into an irreversible abyss. Although the barrier was a product that the demon race had prepared for a long time, it was ultimately the product of many preparations. Perhaps in terms of absolute strength, it would be much stronger than a false sage. However, in terms of agility, they were far inferior to a true false sage. Therefore, under the power of the many false sages of the wild beasts, the barrier finally began to shake gradually, showing signs of collapsing. Facing this expected situation, the demon ancestor did not panic at all. With a flash, he arrived in front of the barrier and pressed down. The infinite power of the entire mission world quickly gathered in front of him and pressed down on the barrier below. Under this pressure, the entire mission world shook violently. All the living beings in this mission world felt like they were being pulled from the depths to the surface, as if they were about to completely shatter from the inside out in the next moment. This change that was triggered from the depths of one's body made all the living beings worry and look forward to it. They were worried about the living beings who had no idea what this meant. On the other hand, they were looking forward to it because they knew that this change meant that the demon ancestor was borrowing the power of the entire mission world. The power produced by this pressure directly acted on the barrier. With this power, the barrier suddenly expanded and became more than twice its original size in the blink of an eye. The trembling caused by the impact on the barrier completely disappeared at this moment, as if it had never appeared. A massive and unparalleled force was generated from the barrier at this moment and spread throughout the entire mission world, making all the living beings in the mission world feel as if they had been punched by the limits of their endurance. Their entire bodies felt like they were about to collapse. Although the demon ancestor was a false sage who had used the entire mission world as a host and was stronger than those who had used a corner of the world as a host, he was still a false sage after all. This identity gave him an advantage when facing the many false sages of the wild beasts, but it was not great. If there was really enough time for the wild beasts to react and allow the false sages of the wild beasts to unleash their strength, it would be almost impossible for the demon ancestor to suppress them with all these preparations and himself. However, it was obvious that there was not enough time for the powerhouses of the wild beasts. When the wild beasts tried their best to fight back against the barrier, wanting to break it and completely recreate the spacetime inside the mountain range, there was an extremely powerful suction force behind the spacetime that began to act on the wild beasts, causing them to suffer from an extremely strong suction force. Under such an unstable foundation and the suppression of the demon ancestor, it was difficult for them to maintain their original position for a while. Their figures gradually left the mission world and gradually entered the darkness outside the spacetime. Following the invisible suction force, they were thrown into a brand new world. When the first false sage of the wild beasts could not resist the suction force and entered the darkness, the power that the other wild beasts could gather decreased, and their resistance began to weaken further. In the end, they could not withstand the powerful pressure in the next moment. One by one, they entered the darkness and gradually disappeared into the barrier. This process only lasted for a few dozen breaths from the beginning to the end. After a few dozen breaths, the interior of the barrier was already calm. It was as if everything inside had disappeared. "It's a success." Feeling the barrier that he had built under his guidance, a trace of disappointment flashed across the demon ancestor's heart. After waiting for a long time and realizing that there was no longer any movement inside, he casually waved his hand and the barrier instantly collapsed, turning into boundless power that flowed into the surrounding void, revealing the scene inside the barrier. At this moment, the extremely vast mountain range had completely disappeared, replaced by a strange pitch-black existence that filled the interior of the barrier. Apart from the strange pitch-black existence, there was no other color or matter that appeared in the area enveloped by the barrier. Seeing this, how could he not understand that his plan had already succeeded? At this moment, an indescribable power descended on the demon ancestor's body through the void, causing the aura of the demon race to become more and more mellow, allowing him to grasp the surroundings and the world more and more refined. It was even to the extent that his own cultivation had grown at a visible rate because of this. At this moment, a cheer came from the demon race. "We've succeeded! We've succeeded!" This cheer was like a switch that turned on the cheers of the entire demon race, causing the entire demon race to sink into a sea of joy at this moment. As the incomparably excited cheers filled the entire mission world, all the demon race emitted an indescribable joy from the depths of their hearts. Facing this, the demon ancestor did not join in, nor did he stop this, but his expression became more and more complicated. At this moment, the holes that were previously broken in the entire mission world began to emit a strong suction force. Under this suction force, some of the weaker demon race did not have any ability to resist at all and were sucked into the holes, disappearing from the mission world. Even some of the more powerful demon race could only hold on for a little longer, but in the end they were still sucked into a hole and disappeared from this world. "What's going on?" The cheers were instantly cut off, replaced by some kind of exclamation of disbelief. Amidst this exclamation, the entire demon race in the mission world fell into an indescribable chaos. "We have broken the limits of the world with our scriptures. Now, the various worlds are waiting for us to conquer. As long as you complete the mission given to you by the heavens and earth, you will be able to return and obtain endless reward. Work hard and conquer the various worlds," the demon ancestor said calmly. This voice directly spread throughout the entire world, whether it was in this world or the hearts of the demon race that had been sucked into the holes and left this world, causing the originally panicking demon race to become excited. Conquering the various worlds, what kind of ambition was that? As expected of the demon ancestor, he was much more magnanimous than them. This kind of emotion unknowingly appeared in their hearts, instantly reducing the many exclamations and roars that filled the entire mission world by 99%. The changes in this world were incomparably fast. Very soon, the entire demon race that existed near the holes were sucked into the holes, and through the holes, they were transmitted to the various worlds that were created out of thin air in this giant tower. At this moment, Duan Shi made his move. Although this mission world was somewhat mysterious, the demon race had also completed monopolizing the entire world. However, this was only the beginning of the completion of the plan. If he wanted the demon race to truly stabilize and gain a firm foothold in this giant tower, he would need to make many changes to this mission world in order to achieve that. And this was obviously not something that could be done by the demon ancestor alone. Waves of golden light were emitted from the demon ancestor's cave, and with the help of the incomparably turbulent laws in this world, it began to spread to the entire world. In the blink of an eye, it had already spread to the entire world, causing the entire world to be instantly dyed in gold, as if the entire world had turned into gold. Along with this change, the tunnels that were originally only temporarily formed, which led to the endless dark void inside the giant tower, and the tunnels that led to the newly born mission worlds, began to undergo various indescribable changes. Amidst these changes, the holes seemed to gradually disappear, and the void gradually returned to its original state. However, inside, the tunnels that could disappear at any time began to solidify, turning into invisible doors that were hidden in the void. Solidifying this passageway and turning it into a door was not an easy task. This had almost completely changed the essence of this mission world, so it was natural that he would suffer an unimaginable backlash. At this moment, Duan Shi felt waves of unimaginably terrifying power acting on his body. Lightning, flames, chilly winds, hurricanes, poisonous gas, evil water, and so on and so forth. Almost all the attacks that could be imagined appeared out of thin air, pouncing on him rapidly, bombarding his body continuously, shaking his power, and making him completely give up on his previous actions. This was the backlash of the world. It was also the backlash of this giant tower. Even if this world had undergone many changes previously, with the power of the demon race and the wild beasts messing up the rules and laws, and even if the giant tower itself had opened the door for Duan Shi due to the great price he had paid, it was still impossible for this action related to changing the essence of the world and the fundamental rules of the giant tower to be absolutely smooth. There would still be some obstacles. Chapter 2407. At this moment, a series of explosions came from Duan Shi's body. It was as if worlds were collapsing and being destroyed inside his body. At this moment, even though he had slightly comprehended the magical effect of concept, he still could not resist the backlash. He could only feel that his body, his strength, his might, and even his life essence were gradually collapsing and disintegrating. In the face of such danger, Duan Shi's determination did not waver at all. He still carried out his original plan and continued to control the rules of this mission world, trying his best to solidify the passages that connected to other worlds. Under his will, the entire mission world began to undergo all sorts of subtle changes. The boundless laws and principles within it constantly squirmed and changed, gradually seeping into the passageways. The passageways that could only be seen for a brief moment gradually became a part of the laws and principles of this world, gradually becoming a fixed attribute of this world. At this moment, the demon ancestor was also extremely nervous. Although he had previously announced to many of the demon race that they could return to this world as long as they completed the mission, that was just an announcement. In the end, whether they could return to this world depended on the results of Duan Shi's next actions. If Duan Shi failed, then his previous promise would be in vain. From then on, the demon race would move from one mission world to another. Who knew when they would discover the public space and leave this giant tower? Only when the end of the world was successful could this mission world truly be transformed into a public space that belonged solely to the demon clan. Only then could the demon clan be brought back, and only then could all the demon clan be confined within this giant tower. After all, if this mission world was transformed into the space of the giant tower, it would not be connected to the outside of the giant tower because it was a mission world itself. Naturally, it would form a closed loop with the other mission world. In this way, any demon race members who passed through this mission world would not be able to find the passage to leave the giant tower, and would naturally be restricted within the giant tower. And this was only the initial situation. As time passed and as the demon race developed, this mission world would become more and more perfect and stable. Naturally, it would be further and further away from the outside of the giant tower. In other words, as long as they could survive the initial period, the demon race would no longer be able to leave this giant tower and threaten humans. Knowing this, one could imagine how much the demon ancestor would care about the evolution of this mission world. The demon ancestor was a false sage that was based on this world. Everything that happened in this world was naturally within his senses. This included the terrifying change that was happening to Duan Shi's body at this very moment. At that moment, he could not help but look at Duan Shi with a worried gaze. This was because Duan Shiji seemed to be one step away from death. He couldn't help but worry about whether Broken Arrow would be able to hold on and change the entire mission world. The changes that were happening to Duan Shi's body continued. With every passing moment, he was one step closer to the abyss of death. However, he did not have the slightest regret or hesitation. He just followed the rhythm he had set before and continued to push forward the changes in this mission world, constantly transforming the entire mission world into a public space. The various backlashes of this mission world were getting stronger and stronger. The entire world seemed to have turned into a collection of disasters due to the backlashes. Even the normal spacetime and light could no longer be seen. Fortunately, there were very few demon race left in this mission world. Only the demon race that could not see too far away and had a wide range of perception remained in this world. For the demon race that had a narrow range of perception, even the current collection of disasters was just some kind of change in the weather within a certain range to them. This had already happened countless times over the years. Therefore, the changes in the entire mission world did not cause the demon race to panic. Only Duan Shi and the demon ancestor were carefully controlling the changes in the details of this mission world. This change lasted for 10 days and 10 nights. After 10 days and 10 nights, when the final passage was completely fixed, the essence of the entire mission world changed completely. When it finally broke free from the shackles of the mission world, Duan Shi could no longer withstand the endless attack. His body, life essence, power, and everything else collapsed in an instant. Only a little mark was left in the impact, entering a certain passage and heading towards a certain mission world. The moment he entered the tunnel, a strange light seemed to appear out of nowhere and directly enveloped the brand. The brand itself was extremely weak, but it was still able to easily withstand the impact of the endless pressure around the tunnel and the corrosion of the boundless power around it. In the end, it safely headed towards a certain mission world at the end of the tunnel. In the end, it entered that mission world and disappeared without a trace. At this moment, facing this change, the demon ancestor only stretched out his hand and did not really stop it, nor did he help the mark. He just watched the mark disappear into the depths of the passage and into a certain world. As he disappeared, the passage also disappeared and turned into nothingness. The existence of the mission world was also completely covered by the boundless darkness. The entire mission world gradually fell into silence at this moment. The heaven and earth became clear again. The originally vast and boundless world had unknowingly expanded by 10 times, and even the space-time had stabilized by countless times. It seemed that apart from the appearance on the surface, everything else had undergone earth-shattering changes. I've finally completed the mission. At this moment, an inexplicable feeling emerged in the demon ancestor's heart. Be it his previous missions or the missions that changed later, they were all completely completed when this mission world became like this. After completing this mission, he received a huge reward that he had never received before. This kind of reward was even enough for him to directly raise his realm to the desperation realm. One must know that he was only able to become a false saint with the help of this mission world. He could not even transcend this mission world. Under such circumstances, he was at least one realm away from the desperation realm, which was the realm of false saint that could transcend this world. If he were to directly advance to the desperation realm, it would be equivalent to crossing 2 realms in a row. This kind of reward was so great that it was enough to make any cultivator wake up from their dreams with a smile. However, I still can't choose this after all. Feeling the magnitude of the reward, Duan Shi sighed in the end. Although choosing this kind of reward would allow him to obtain unimaginable benefits, it was only the benefits that he had obtained. For the entire demon race, it was of no help at all. Instead, it might even make the situation of the entire demon race worse. In this way, he could only give up on this reward in the end and choose to transform it into the rules of the giant tower, transforming it into a fundamental change to the essence of this mission space. As he confirmed this kind of reward, a strange blue light descended from the void and covered the vast world that had grown more than 10 times in the blink of an eye, or rather, the vast space with this brilliance. the weak wild beasts that originally existed in this world completely collapsed and turned into nutrients for the world, allowing the world to regenerate and change again. Immediately afterward, the terrain of the world began to change. Countless squares and buildings appeared out of thin air. The various man-made traces and living beings that originally existed were completely eliminated, making the entire world almost look like a replica of another public space. Of course, it was only the general structure. Many details were still very different from the other public space. In particular, the mountains, grasslands, oceans, rivers, swamps, mountains, hills, deserts, forests, snowy mountains, and so on that covered the entire world were landscapes that could only be found in a normal world. In the end, the blue light directly merged with the outer layer of this world, where the world was called the world barrier. It changed the nature of this mission world from the original mission world into a public space that was 100 times more perfect than the cultivator's public space. A demon race's public space. At this moment, in another public space, which was also the human race's public space, the entire public space began to shake violently. It was as if a huge object had slammed into the public space, causing the entire public space to shake continuously as if it was being grabbed by an invisible hand. Faced with this situation, the emotions of many cultivators in the human race's public space began to change greatly. Some became overjoyed, some became inexplicably panicked, some became indifferent, and some became agitated and irritable. There were all sorts of emotions, but it showed the various emotions of many cultivators. It seems that they seemed to have succeeded. The excited cultivators had similar thoughts. Those who were panicking were the kind of cultivators who had no idea what was going on. At this moment, they were all worried about whether the public space would be destroyed directly. Some living beings that were closer to the entrance of the mission world even chose to directly enter the entrance and hide in the mission world. However, they did not know that compared to this public space, the changes in the mission world were even greater. When the many demons left the demon race's public space, new races were born in the countless mission worlds that existed in the entire tower. This new race was the demon race that was formed by the combination of the boundless evil aura and the infinite karma force inside the tower and the power of the outside world. After these demons were born, they followed their instincts and began to exert influence on the mission world. Most of the demon race's influence on the mission world was relatively small, almost negligible, and they did not cause the mission world to change in essence. However, some of the demon race, whether it was because of their origins or abilities, directly distorted the mission world, breaking the original trajectory of the mission world, causing the essence of the existence of the mission world to change. Some were distorted into semi-fixed worlds, some directly collapsed, and some even directly established an indescribable connection with the demon race's public space, allowing the demon race to obtain the opportunity to enter the public space. In the end, through the public space, many of the demon race's public space were transferred to other mission worlds, helping the demon race conquer mission worlds one after another. This trend of development was so intense that even many living beings in the human public space could not react in time. In this process, the conflict between humans and the demon race began to arise. In other words, the conflict between the cultivators who carried out the mission and the demon race began to arise. It had to be known that the demon race's instinctive desire to change the world and conquer the world generally conflicted with the cultivators' mission. Under such circumstances, the cultivators who carried out the mission naturally had to eliminate the influence of the demon race if they wanted to complete the mission. Naturally, there would be a conflict with them. In the beginning, the ones who gained the upper hand were the humans, the cultivators who were carrying out missions. However, as time passed, as the number of demons increased, and as more and more demons entered the demon race's public space, the humans gradually fell into a disadvantageous position in the conflict between the mission worlds, and were gradually suppressed by the demon race. More and more mission worlds were preserved in this process, and with the efforts of many demons, They established a connection with the demon race's public space. Under such circumstances, the luck of the entire demon race had flourished to a level that was unimaginable at the beginning. From the outside, the entire tower seemed to be completely enveloped by the luck of the demon race. Although it was still pitch black, the feeling it gave people was already extremely different. At the very least, they were much less welcoming to the many living beings in the outside world. Originally, once a living being who met the requirements came to the vicinity of the giant tower would naturally activate its power to take them in. However, after the establishment of the demon race's public space 100 years later, the giant tower required living beings who met the requirements to have an extremely strong will to have the opportunity to enter the giant tower and accept the test of the giant tower. In contrast, the luck of the demon ancestor did not increase much. On the contrary, compared to before, his luck had decreased a little. Although he was still the best in the entire demon race, he could no longer rely on his own luck to be comparable to the combined luck of all the other members of the demon race. Chapter 2408. While the demon race was developing vigorously in the many mission worlds in the giant tower, the demon ancestor was busy with another matter, which was to search for the era severing. He was looking for the era severing that had turned into a mark and reincarnated. At first, he was just curious to know what race he had become after the era severing reincarnated, what kind of aptitude he had, and how much he had grown. However, it was a pity that when he followed the passage that the era severing entered and headed to the mission world that the passage pointed to, he found that there was no trace of the era severing's existence. It was as if the era severing had never existed. Even if he traced back time, foresaw the future, and even vaguely searched for various time dimensions, he couldn't find any trace of his existence. This kind of situation was obviously beyond his imagination. One had to know that the passage led to this mission world. As long as one passed through that passage, they would definitely enter any of these worlds. However, he clearly saw the mark of the era severing passing through this passage. The contradiction between what he saw with his own eyes and the reality made it difficult for the demon ancestor to maintain his original state of interest. Instead, he began to pay more attention to the era severing situation. It was precisely because of this that in the following days, he thoroughly investigated the traces of the era severing's existence, looking for mission worlds that might have the era severing's existence. However, until now, even though so much time had passed in the demon race's public space, he still couldn't find any trace of the era severing's existence. In the entire tower, whether it was the mission worlds that existed now or in the past, there was not a trace of the era severing left. This situation naturally made the demon ancestor even more puzzled. What's going on? Even if he reincarnated to the outside world, there should be some traces left, especially in this public space. With this thought, the demon ancestor looked at the demon race's public space where he was. This public space was so full of vitality and so peaceful. Every living being in this public space felt like they were in a fairyland. There was a sense of pride, joy, and indescribable happiness. In fact, for many of the demon race, this public space was their fairyland. It was their dream heaven. Although most of the demon race were born in the predecessor mission worlds of this public space. However, among the many demon clans, there were still quite a number of demon clans that were born from other mission worlds and finally entered this public space through various means. For the monster race, the process of entering this public space through various means was regarded as the process of ascending. Indeed, the situation in this public space was too similar to the demon clan's paradise in their dreams. One had to know that in this public space, the demon race was the absolute protagonist. In this place, all the rules, all the structure of time and space, and even all the energy that existed in it, existed for the demon tribe. They all existed to provide convenience for the demon tribe, and were constructed to allow the demon tribe to grow stronger and faster. Upon entering this place, Every demon felt as though they had entered a place that was most suitable for them to live in and grow in. As for being able to connect to many other mission worlds and enter and conquer other worlds at will, that was the full extent of the mysteriousness of this public space. With all these conveniences, it was perfectly normal for the demon clan to treat this place as a paradise for the demon clan and a fairyland for the demon clan. As more and more demon clans had such thoughts, this concept would naturally be recognized by more and more demon clans. Now, after such a long time, it was no longer just those demon clans that ascended from other mission worlds who had such a view. Instead, all the demon clans here, including the demon clans that were born in the predecessor mission worlds of this public space, thought so too. Looking at the vast public space in front of him, the demon ancestor felt much more relaxed as he looked at the joy and happiness of the many demons in it. These demon clans could be said to be his descendants. Seeing that these demon clans were living such a wonderful and happy life, he naturally felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction from the bottom of his heart. In this sense of satisfaction, he had already accepted the fact that he could not find the end of the world no matter how hard he tried. Compared to the fact that he could not find the end of the world, the matter of the demon clan was more important. Therefore, although he was still looking for the end of the world, he no longer devoted all his energy to it like before. Instead, he devoted more energy to guiding and protecting the demon clan. Although this public space truly created the end of the world, as an existence that relied on this entire mission space to become a false sage, his ability to control this public space was far from what ordinary false sages could compare to. In fact, it was not something that the end of the world could compare to. Under such circumstances, he naturally had a clear grasp of the changes in this public space and the situation of the many demon clans in it. Of course, he also understood the flaws and weaknesses of this public space to the demon clan. He could also clearly grasp the changes in the demon clan's emotions and whether they had taken a detour or taken a wrong path. In this way, he could naturally guide the demon clan according to his thoughts and let the demon clan advance according to the path he had predicted. To many demon clans, this vividly displayed the wisdom and power of the demon ancestor, causing the existence of the demon ancestor to be acknowledged by many demon clans and respected by many false sages of the demon clan. This allowed his will to be carried out more thoroughly without him realizing it. After all, a being that knew everything and could solve any problem that could give him a headache, even if all the wisdom of the demon race were combined, would not be enough to give him a headache. Naturally, he would be able to gain the trust of the demon race and carry out his will more thoroughly, while the situation of the demon clan was developing according to the expectations of the end of the world and the demon ancestor. In a certain mission space, a living being was looking up at the sky and sighing. "Why did I become a wild beast?" The long sigh of this living being was like the roar of a wild beast in the ears of ordinary living beings. It caused the entire mountain range where this living being was to be filled with sand and rock. Countless living beings fled in all directions as if the end of the world had arrived. This wild beast was none other than the life form that was reincarnated from the mark of the end of the world. That's right, the end of the world was indeed reincarnated in this giant tower. He was reincarnated in one of the many mission worlds. However, he did not reincarnate into a human, nor did he reincarnate into a demon clan. Instead, he reincarnated into the common enemy of both humans and demon clan, a wild beast. Moreover, he seemed to be a wild beast that was extremely similar to the wild beast in the mission world where the demon clan was born. It could even be said that the wild beast that he reincarnated into was the descendant of the wild beast in the mission world that was banished to another mission world. This situation made Duan sure feel like he had been *ket up. After all, he had worked so hard to banish the wild beast from the mission world with the demon ancestor, clearing up the world and transforming it into a mission space. He had even lost his life because of this, leaving only a mark to reincarnate. However, who could tell him why he reincarnated into this wild beast that he had banished to the point where it could not even stand in its own world. After roaring at the sky for a while, Duan Shi helplessly stopped. This kind of venting was meaningless, at least, based on the previous situation. This kind of venting was completely meaningless. Instead of continuing to vent, he might as well save some energy to think about what he should do now. His intelligence and memories were still there. Even if he was transformed into a wild beast, he could still easily regain control of his power. He could even refine his body and regain his born Taoism aptitude, so that he could once again look exactly the same as he did in his previous life. In fact, if he was willing, it was only a matter of time before he regained his cultivation realm and became a supreme emperor again. However, he knew very well that he could not make this choice. The demon ancestor's mistake was still a lesson for him. If he were to do this, wouldn't he be changing his race and completely becoming a demon clan? If that was the case, what was the point of him trying so hard to restrict the demon clan in this giant tower and eliminating the possibility of the demon clan becoming the main character of the world? Was he digging a hole for himself to fill? More importantly, his intuition told him that if he were to do this, something extremely serious would happen. When that happened, he might be so regretful that he would want to strangle himself to death before he was even born. Since I can't transform, it seems like I can only cultivate with my current identity. The wild beast that looked like a 9-headed lion lay on the ground helplessly with a sigh. Immediately afterwards, the power in the wild beast's body surged, and the endless power in the surroundings surged towards him. In the blink of an eye, it completely fused with his body, causing his body to gradually give off some sort of indescribable ripples. It began to produce an unimaginably terrifying presence, causing many of the living creatures in the mountain range to flee involuntarily. They did not dare to remain in this terrifying region any longer. Most of them were ordinary beasts and wild beasts, but a small portion of them were wild beasts. However, compared to Duan Shi, who had the memories of his previous life, the wild beasts' intelligence was relatively low. They did not even have the ability to think. Naturally, it was impossible for them to know that the wild beast that was releasing the terrifying aura and suppressing the heavens and earth was their own kind. The living beings that were fleeing were wild beasts and wild beasts that were much weaker than them. Duan Shi naturally did not care about the behavior of the many living beings. At this moment, he only focused on circulating the power in his body. He used his newly born wild beast's instinct to absorb the power from the outside world and worked hard to cultivate and strengthen the power in his body. As he grew stronger, all kinds of subtle mysteries automatically flowed from the power into his heart. It made him vaguely understand many secrets of the wild beast that he had not discovered before, and he found the various powers that the wild beast originally had. As he comprehended this, his absorption of power became faster and faster, and the efficiency of refining power also became higher. For a moment, his aura became more and more violent, and the aura that his body exuded became stronger and more vast. Not long after, it was no longer limited to this mountain range, and it began to spread out to the world outside the mountain range. This mission world seemed to have been specially opened for Duan Shi. There were no other cultivators from the public space of the human race or the monster race from the public space of the monster race. There was only an incomparably vast, incomparably wild, incomparably primitive, and even more incomparably dangerous world. There was not even a trace of humanoid creatures in the entire world, let alone the various civilizations that were built by humanoid creatures. Under such circumstances, the wild beast that Duan Shi had transformed into released his aura and powerful aura without any scruples, but it only caused chaos in this world. It did not arouse the covetous eyes of other living beings, nor did any human or monster race come to eliminate it. Although he did not directly cultivate the various divine abilities and mysteries of his past life, the various memories of his past life, and the various mysteries of cultivation still remained in his heart. In this way, even though he was cultivating with the help of the wild beast's instinct, Duansher quickly got on the right track. His strength broke through the shackles of one wild beast after another in an extremely short period of time. In just a few days, he had grown to a level that was tens of thousands of times his original strength. If converted to the realm of a normal cultivator, his strength was already comparable to a primordial unity pure yang cultivator. It was an insignificant achievement for Duansher. In the past, he did not even bother to sweep his perception over existences of this level. However, in this extremely wild and primitive world, this kind of strength was already standing at the peak. In this entire world, there were very few existences that could threaten him. I finally have some strength to protect myself. On this day, Duansher recovered from his cultivation and could not help but sigh when he sensed the strength contained in his wild beast's body. At this moment, when he looked around, the entire world seemed to have become extremely peaceful, as if it had become a small garden to him. This was clearly a feeling that was born after his strength had risen to a level where the dangers of this world could not affect him. It was a feeling that was close to an illusion. Chapter 2409. Duansher's mission world began to shake slightly at this moment. It was as if its foundation had been shaken, but it also felt as if something huge was grabbing the world from the outside and shaking it. Duansher instantly recovered from the shock of his breakthrough when he sensed this change. His mind became extremely solemn. This was because he clearly felt that if something happened to this world, something would happen to him too. He might even die forever. After all, he had already transformed into a wild beast and had only just obtained the strength of a Tai Pure Yang expert. If something happened to this world, he would naturally be affected as well. If this world really collapsed, there was a high chance that he would die along with it. Once he died, his imprint would still exist and he would continue to reincarnate. However, his memories and consciousness would turn into nothingness, and he would never be able to return. And this, to him, was no different from truly dying forever. After all, even if his imprint was reincarnated, he would no longer be himself without the memory and consciousness of this life. With a thought, he began to scan the entire mission world with his perception. Although it would be an exaggeration to say that he was an ant compared to his previous life, he was still a Tai Pure Yang expert after all. The perceptive ability of an expert of this level had already reached an unimaginable level. Although it was blurry, he still managed to bring the entire mission world into his perception after a few breaths. When he brought the entire mission world into his perception, he discovered the source of the tremors and the source of the danger he felt. It was a strange change that was happening somewhere tens of millions of miles away from him. There, the void collapsed and even time was in chaos. Pieces of extremely distorted shadows appeared out of nowhere, fiercely piercing into that chaotic place, causing that chaotic place to constantly expand, and then compressing the surrounding space-time, shaking the entire mission world. Duansher could sense an extremely familiar aura from the extremely distorted phantoms. It was an aura that belonged to a murderous aura. In other words, what was happening at this moment was more like endless murderous aura pouring into the mission world from the outside world. Naturally, it was impossible for there to be nothing in that distorted area. In fact, there were countless living beings there. However, most of these living beings could not withstand the drastic change in spacetime, so they were completely destroyed the moment the spacetime changed. Not even their remains were left behind. However, if there were those who couldn't bear it, there would naturally be those who could. The living beings that could withstand the murderous aura underwent earth-shattering changes in an instant. Their auras began to expand crazily and their consciousness began to become extremely chaotic. In the blink of an eye, Duansher felt that his senses had become blurry under the impact of the aura released by the creature that had undergone a drastic change. His vision that was not clear in the first place had completely collapsed, turning a large area of the area into a black hole that he could not see at all. Wild beasts are formed by the condensation of karma and murderous aura. How can they be infected by the murderous aura? Duan Shi was dumbfounded at this moment. He felt as if his perception had been overturned. In his opinion, wild beasts were living beings that were born from absorbing boundless murderous aura and karma in the mission world. It could be said that they were the embodiment of karma and murderous aura. That was why killing the wild beasts could achieve the effect of purifying the murderous aura and karma. However, everything that was happening before him directly told him that his previous perception was wrong. Only different substances could corrode and assimilate with each other. If the same substances were mixed together, there would either be no reaction, or the weak would become stronger. However, the wild beasts in front of him were actually being corroded by the murderous aura. They were becoming chaotic and powerful because of the murderous aura. This in itself meant that the wild beasts were different from what he knew in the past. As such thoughts flashed through his mind, he flew up without hesitation. The nine-headed lion's body began to quickly rush toward the place where he sensed countless lights and shadows pouring into this world. The nine-headed lion already had many abilities. Among them, Godspeed was obviously one of them. In addition to his current strength, he had crossed a considerable distance in just a few breaths' time and arrived at a place that he could not sense at all with his current perception. The closer he got to that place, the more Duan Shi felt a tremendous pressure pressing down on him. It was as if the place he was approaching was the most dangerous and terrifying place in the world. It could even make him feel despair. What the hell is that? Duan Shi was truly terrified when he saw the lights and shadows with his own eyes. This was because he saw endless massacres, endless pain, and endless despair in those lights and shadows. It contained all the negative information and negative scenes that could be found in the world. The massacres, the terrifying punishments, and the darkness were just child's play compared to the scenes that were happening in the lights and shadows. Even though Duan Shi had become a supreme emperor in his previous life and had seen a lot of time, he could not help but feel terrified by those existences. At that moment, some of the lights and shadows distorted rapidly. All of a sudden, some strange creatures broke through the lights and shadows and rushed out. They began to wreak havoc in this mission world. They mercilessly destroyed all the living creatures in this mission world, regardless of whether they had been corrupted or not. In the beginning, some of these creatures were still relatively weak. They did not cause much damage to the world. In fact, they were so little that they were almost non-existent. However, as time went by, the creatures that came out became stronger and stronger. Their influence on the world also increased. In the end, their existence alone began to oppress the world, causing a lot of turbulence, cracks, and chaos in this world. Faced with the shaking of this world, Duan Shi obviously could not stand by and watch it continue. When the creatures that could shake this world and cause harm to this world began to wreak havoc, he finally couldn't help but make a move. His 9 lion heads opened up and different rays of light shot out from his lion heads, charging at the many strange creatures. They began to act on those creatures, producing all kinds of indescribable and different effects. Some were destruction, some were suppression, some were banishment, some were sealing, some were hypnosis, and some were harming. There were all kinds of them, but every one of them was the most suitable for those strange creatures. In other words, they took effect the fastest and had the most shocking effects. Soon, there were tens of millions of strange creatures lying on the ground around those areas. Some were unconscious, some were corpses, and some were simply frozen in time. They were completely unharmed. Duan Shi, who had done all of this, did not show any signs of fatigue. Judging from his actions, it seemed like he could continue this action forever. After all, he was a supreme emperor in his previous life. He was a powerful existence that could easily wipe out false saints and those in despair. even if his strength had been reduced to the level of an ant compared to his previous life. His consciousness alone was enough to perform things that ordinary primordial pure yang experts could not even dream of. To him, taking such a long time to deal with those creatures that rushed out of the light was obviously an achievement that was not worth mentioning. However, Duan Shi, who had done all of this, did not feel the slightest bit happy. This was because he had no idea what was happening right now. Why would this mission world be corroded by such pure murderous aura? Why did he appear in this world? Why did he become a wild beast? Why would a wild beast be corroded by the murderous aura? All of this was an incomparably difficult problem for him to solve. It made him feel some kind of invisible malice. What's going on? Could it be that teacher has a mission for me to complete? After pondering for a while, Duan Shi finally raised his head and murmured to the sky. He was already a supreme emperor in his previous life, and he was already far ahead of all the other cultivators in this world. No matter how he thought about it, in this part of the world, if there was anyone who could go against his will and arrange for him to come here, change his identity to that of a desolate beast, and cause this mission world to undergo such an incomprehensible change, it could only be his teacher, the one he had never seen clearly, Luo Fan. Therefore, at this time, when he could not figure out what was going on and what direction things would develop in the future, the only thing that Duan Shi could think of was the possibility that this was his teacher's plan. However, he had to admit that the gap between him and his teacher was really too big. With such a huge gap, he could not understand his teacher's thoughts at all, and he could not determine which direction he should work towards in order to not let his teacher down. That's right, after realizing that it might be his teacher's arrangement, he no longer had any intention of resisting. Instead, he only had the mood to cooperate. What he was worried about was no longer how to escape, but how to complete his teacher's mission and arrangements. His loyalty to Luo Fan was so stubborn, however, it was obvious that he would not get an answer to his question. Duan Shi had actually expected this. After all, everything that happened before was just his speculation. He was not sure if it was his teacher's arrangement or not. Perhaps it was just the effect of some power that he did not understand, or perhaps it was really just a coincidence. Under the situation where he could not get any guidance and could not find any answers, Duan Shi knew what the only way to go was. Then I'll do it according to my own ideas. If it's really my teacher's arrangement, he must have considered my thoughts and actions. In the end, Duan Shi came to this conclusion. Since he had decided to do it according to his own ideas, the confusion in Duan Shi's heart was naturally swept away. Immediately, his body trembled, and with a light crack, he broke through some invisible barrier. As the invisible barrier was broken, endless power began to emerge from his body and quickly fused into his body, causing his body to begin to improve endlessly. With his extraordinary state of mind, he finally broke through the limit of his body and stepped into the innate Grand Luo realm. One of the important characteristics of an innate Grand Luo was that they could be self-sufficient. They could generate endless power to satisfy their own cultivation and growth, and they did not need to absorb any power from the outside world. Naturally, he was currently a wild beast, so it was naturally impossible for him to be an innate Grand Luo. Right now, he had only reached the level of an innate Grand Luo. There was still a fundamental difference between him and an actual innate Grand Luo. As he broke through to the next realm, his body began to grow rapidly. In just a few breaths, his body had already grown 10 times bigger. In another few breaths, he grew 10 times bigger. In just a short period of time, he had already expanded from his original size to a colossus. One was a 9-headed lion that looked indomitable, as if its back alone could support the entire sky. To Duan Shi, the thing that limited his growth was energy. Or rather, it was the energy of this world. However, this limitation no longer existed after he broke through the shackles of his body and stepped into the innate Grand Luo realm. Therefore, as long as he stepped into this realm, his strength would increase at a speed that was countless times faster than before. Because of this, he was able to expand his body by thousands of times in such a short period of time. His strength had also increased by thousands of times. When his body expanded to this level, one of his lion heads suddenly opened its mouth and chomped down on the countless silhouettes that were filled with killing intent that were growing rapidly. This lion head had a strange ability that was different from other lions. It could eat and digest everything that was imaginable and unimaginable. Now that his strength had been greatly enhanced, Duan Shi had decided to devour the source of the mutation in front of him. This was what he could do as a desolate beast. It was the only way to protect this world, to protect his current identity, and the existence of this body. It was also the best way to solve this problem. His lion head opened its mouth and began to expand madly. The head that was already enormous to begin with expanded to the point that it could support the heavens and earth in the blink of an eye. In fact, its teeth alone felt like millions of mountains were stacked on top of each other. Under such a huge mouth, the area that the countless silhouettes that were expanding crazily became so small that it was completely enveloped by the huge mouth. Chapter 24:10. As he devoured the light silhouettes, countless energies began to gather around them. In the blink of an eye, they surrounded the light silhouettes and began to weave themselves into a tight seal that was completely based on the nine-headed lion's body and power. The light silhouettes were rapidly compressed into a black sphere the size of a fist, hovering in the strange space that the lion's head was connected to. Throughout the process, Duan Shi clearly sensed an unparalleled pressure being released from the sphere. It shook the space, his power, and his body, making him feel like he was going to explode at any moment. What a powerful impact! Duan Shi mumbled to himself as he forcefully suppressed the trembling of his body. At that moment, he could clearly sense that the existence behind the light silhouettes was stronger than him. Even with the strength he possessed in his past life, it was impossible for him to withstand this hole for long. He was only at the innate Grand Luo realm in this life, so he would have to risk his life if he wanted to do it. However, Duan Shi quickly changed his mind. But I'm a wild beast now. Why would I need to forcefully withstand it? With that thought in mind, his power surged and the sphere in the strange space began to tremble slightly. The extremely tight seal on the power suddenly loosened. As it loosened, countless cracks suddenly appeared on the sphere that was initially flawless and countless light silhouettes began to surge out of the cracks. Then, they were quickly crushed by the unique digestive force of the strange space around them. In the end, they turned into countless malevolent auras and karmic forces that gradually fused with the space according to the operating rules of the strange space. Through the space, they fused with the nine-headed lion's body. Thump, 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 a loud heartbeat began to resound from the nine-headed lion's body. The heartbeat was so loud that it sounded like a thunderclap that resounded throughout the world. It even shook the entire world and shocked every living being in it. It was so much so that even space began to tremble from the heartbeat. It looked as if there was a terrifying power stirring the space. The scene was so shocking that the wild beasts in this world could not help but feel reverence. They could not help but kneel in the nine-headed lion's direction. Their instincts were telling them that their king, their god, and their ancestor were about to be born. Wild beasts were born from the transformation of baleful aura and karma in the mission world. However, this did not mean that they were baleful auras and karmic karma. As a matter of fact, compared to killing intent and karma, wild beasts were much more complicated and peaceful. This could be vaguely seen from the fact that those desolate beasts were unable to remain unscathed while enduring the baleful aura and karma. Instead, they would be greatly corroded by the baleful aura and might even collapse in the end. Under such circumstances, Duan Shi's nine-headed lion form began to devour the malevolent qi and karmic force. Obviously, it was not as simple as devouring the power he created. The instant the baleful aura and karmic force fused into his body, Many of his organs, blood, strength, lymph, and all the other circulatory systems in his body were instantly shaken. Everything seemed to have suddenly woken up from a deep slumber. Their activity skyrocketed at a speed that was 100 times faster than before. Because of this, the foundation of his life had undergone all sorts of subtle changes. It had become purer and more powerful. In contrast to the changes to his body, indescribably terrifying impacts kept affecting his soul. The impacts were endless information, endless emotions, and endless wails. Receiving the impact of this information felt like accepting the sins of countless living beings. Even if it was the end of the world, it still felt like it was unable to bear the burden. So, the foundation of the wild beasts is to remove most of the negative emotions contained in the baleful aura and karma. Dwanshur came to a realization at that moment. At this moment, he also understood why the wild beasts would be corroded after being injected with the evil aura and karmic negative karma. With the poor intelligence and fragile soul of the wild beasts, how could they not be corroded and assimilated after enduring so much negative emotions? However, it was obvious that Dwanshur was not an ordinary wild beast. He was a supreme emperor in his past life. The soul that he had trained to become a supreme emperor still existed. How could his soul, which would not be shaken even if the world was destroyed, be so easily shaken? Even though the baleful aura and karmic karma that contained numerous negative emotions had drowned him, he still felt enormous pressure, and he wouldn't collapse because of it. During the process of the wild beasts forming, most of the negative emotions contained in the baleful aura and karma were removed. It made the wild beasts more rational and controllable. However, at the same time, it made the wild beasts lose most of their strength and pride, as if they had entered a palace. The wild beasts that Dwanshur had seen in the past were only slightly stronger than ordinary wild beasts. There was not much difference in their nature. That was the best proof. One had to know that wild beasts were born from the world, but the wild beasts were born from baleful aura and karma. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. How could it be just a slight difference in strength? At this time, Dwanshur's 9-headed lion body began to change. His body gradually turned grayish-brown. The fur on his body began to change shape, becoming harder and more elegant. As for his heads, countless tiny runes appeared out of thin air and began to gather in the eyes of his 9 heads. Faintly, countless scales appeared all over his body. His body began to expand crazily. Originally, he only had an indomitable spirit after the transformation, but now, his body was expanding to an indomitable spirit. In fact, just being indomitable wasn't enough to describe him. It felt like the world couldn't bear his size. He seemed extremely suppressed in this world. As for his aura, it was increasing at an unimaginable speed. The quality of his aura became purer, stronger, and more terrifying. An earth-shattering aura was constantly being released from his body. Gradually, it swept across the entire world, causing the entire world to be enveloped by his aura. All living beings, be it wild beasts or ordinary wild beasts, felt an unprecedented terror and majesty at this moment. From the perspective of strength, Dwanshur's strength was rising crazily at this moment. The barrier between the innate golden heavenly realm and the quasi-saint realm had been broken through a long time ago. Now, he was already close to the barrier between the quasi-saint realm and the pseudo-saint realm. He was about to break through the barrier and step into the pseudo-saint realm. It felt as if all the barriers between realms were as fragile as a piece of paper to him. What a powerful corrosive force! If it wasn't for the fact that my spirit was strong enough, I would have been completely devoured by now. Dwanshur's spirit floated above the boundless ocean of information. No matter how the ocean of information surged, it could only shake him and not harm him. Clearly, this meant that he had completely isolated himself from the influence of the boundless information from the baleful aura. At the very least, it directly affected his spirit. After all, although the information did not directly harm his spirit, it had cut off the direct connection between his spirit and his body. As a result, he could only feel the battle on the spiritual level. He could not reconnect to his body and control it. Although Duanxer felt helpless about this situation, it was not that he could not understand it. This situation was clearly because the information that was being transmitted had exceeded his ability to process, causing him to not have the strength to process the information coming from his body. However, this change would not last forever. As long as he could fully control the information, suppress, purify, or eliminate it, he would naturally be able to reconnect to his body and return to normal. Before that, all he had to do was to work hard. "I'll let my body handle it on its own." In the end, he came to this conclusion and began to carefully process the boundless ocean of information. As time passed, his spirit was also affected by the improvement of his body. Unknowingly, he was getting closer to the level of his previous life. Naturally, Duanxer was happy to see this happen. Although he was curious about what had happened to his body and how he had grown, he still carried out the arrangements he had made in the past and worked hard to process the ocean of information. When his spirit had grown to the false saint stage at some point, he had already processed a small portion of the ocean of information. The entire liquid level had dropped by hundreds of feet. There were even some islands vaguely appearing on the ocean. There were countless strange lights and shadows that were changing, as if they were worlds. In Duanxer's mind, only a few thousand years had passed. Breaking through to the false saint stage in a few thousand years was something that even his previous life could not compare to. This made Duanxer even more curious about the changes that had happened to his body. However, it was obvious that after his spirit had grown, his ability to control himself had naturally become stronger. This kind of curiosity naturally could not shake his thoughts, let alone make him give up what he should be doing now. Therefore, he quickly suppressed this curiosity and continued to process the ocean of information. Time slowly passed. 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 10 million years. Unknowingly, billions of years had passed in Duanxer's mind. During this time, his spirit was constantly improving. He didn't know when it started, but he had already raised his realm to the peak level of his previous life. In other words, he had reached the level of a supreme emperor. However, after reaching this step, he seemed to have reached his limit. Even after spending hundreds of millions of years, he still could not make any more breakthroughs. Back then, he had already processed a small portion of the ocean of information after spending thousands of years. But now, after spending billions of years, the ocean of information was still not completely processed. At this moment, there was still a thin layer of information blocking his spirit, preventing his spirit from truly connecting to his body. The reason for this was naturally not because the deeper he went, the more stubborn and difficult it was to process the information. Instead, it was because the amount of information that was injected into his spirit had suddenly skyrocketed by tens of thousands of times. The skyrocketing amount of information made his processing speed vaguely show signs of not being able to keep up with the speed of the information being injected. As a result, the speed at which the ocean of information was reduced by tens of thousands of times. Because of this, the process that should have taken less than 10,000 years to complete had been delayed for billions of years, and it still hadn't been completed. However, this was clearly the end. Next, as long as he broke through that thin but incomparably tenacious layer of information, he would truly transcend all shackles, truly connect with his own body, and regain control of his own body. At this moment, Duanxer's spirit was floating in a boundless void. In this void, there were floating islands one after another. They were densely packed together like stars in the void. On those islands were worlds after worlds, worlds that looked extremely cruel, vile, and dangerous. These were the methods he had used to process the information over the years. He had established all kinds of complicated transformation rules on those islands, which could purify the negative effects in the information. It was because of them that Duanshur could have enough confidence to break away from the influence of the information and truly obtain freedom despite the endless information being injected into him from the outside world. Come on, let me see how much my body has grown over the years. Duanshur's spirit looked down at the layer of information film below and thought so. Then, he grabbed at the void with both hands. Rays of light appeared out of thin air and began to form an incomparably huge, sharp blade in the void. It extended and shrank continuously and stabbed downward. Chapter 24:11. The layer of information membrane below him broke. Following that, Duanshur finally regained the feeling that he had not felt for billions of years. It was the feeling of his body. How can it be so powerful? The moment his soul reconnected to his body, the first thought that came to his mind was shock. It was an indescribable shock. His desolate beast body was tens of thousands of times stronger than he had imagined it to be. Even when he was at the pinnacle of his previous life, the feeling that came from his body was still far from being comparable to the feeling that came from his body now. This situation was far beyond his imagination. Why is this happening? Could it be that wild beasts are so much stronger than humans? Duanshur could not help but wonder. After sensing the power that was transmitted from his body, he began to pay attention to his surroundings. He was even more stunned when he noticed it. Because, at this moment, he was no longer in the mission world as he had imagined. Instead, he was surrounded by boundless darkness. When he distinguished it carefully, he noticed that the darkness in the surroundings wasn't true darkness at all, and it was boundless baleful energy and the power of karma. He had broken away from the restrictions of the mission world. In other words, he had broken away from the mission world's protection. He had directly come into contact with the endless evil intent and karma outside the mission world. In other words, he had obtained the treatment of the mission world. Just like in the mission world, he was directly attached to the giant tower with a thought. He realized the changes in his body. If he was an ordinary living being, it would be difficult for him to determine his size without any reference. However, it was obvious that Duanshur was not an ordinary living being. Even though he was surrounded by darkness without any point of reference, he was still able to easily determine the size of his body. At this moment, his body was much bigger than any of the huge bodies he had imagined. Moreover, it was many times bigger than he had imagined. Compared to his current size, even in the mission world, his size was insignificant. It was not even comparable to the size of a cell in his body. As for his original indomitable appearance, it was billions of times smaller than it was now. No wonder I appeared outside the mission world. It's obvious that the mission world can't accommodate me anymore. After confirming his size, Duanshur could not help but sigh. At that moment, he finally understood why he felt the amount of information surging into his mind suddenly skyrocketed for a period of time. During that period of time, he had clearly broken through the mission world and directly came into contact with the endless evil intent and karma outside the mission world. Without the protection and filtering of the mission world, the karmic karma would naturally pour into his body at a speed that was many times faster than before when it came into contact with his body. The boundless information it contained would naturally rush into his mind and turn into a sea of information. After understanding this, he could not help but feel a little scared. Fortunately, he blocked it. Otherwise, he might not be able to wake up again. Even his body would be completely disintegrated by the endless evil intent and karma around him and would eventually disappear without a trace. Where are those wild beasts? With a thought in his mind, he was inexplicably confused. As he was puzzled, he could not help but explore his body up and down. As he explored, he suddenly discovered that there were countless spacetimes hidden within his fur. These spacetimes were attached to his body and protected by the aura he emanated. They weren't devoured and destroyed by the boundless baleful energy and karma in the surroundings. In those space-times there were countless living beings living in them. Among them, some were wild beasts and some were wild beasts. Because those space-times were attached to his body, they could only exist because of the protection of his aura. Therefore, there were all kinds of subtle connections between them. These connections connected all the spacetimes together. Those powerful wild beasts could use various means to travel between the spacetimes, thus connecting all the spacetimes into a whole. It looked like there was a huge world attached to Duan Shi's nine-headed lion body. Among the many spacetimes, there were 9 spacetimes that stood above the others, becoming the peak of many spacetimes. Each of the 9 spacetimes was bigger than any mission world that Duan Shi had seen in the past. They were attached to Duan Shi's 9 heads, hiding themselves by relying on the fur and the many folds on the 9 heads. Due to the different characteristics of the 9 heads, the characteristics of these spacetimes were also very different. Among the many spacetimes attached to Duan Shi's body, they were like the 9 extreme points of many spacetimes. They were separated and each ruled a large number of other spacetimes. Duan Shi had spent billions of years in his mind. At least, the time that he had experienced in the outside world wasn't any shorter than the time that he had experienced in the outside world. In such a long time, the overall order of the world formed by the many spacetimes had developed to an extremely perfect or mature level. All kinds of strict leveling and ascending mechanisms had been completely established. Even the civilization of the desolate beasts had been born unknowingly. The 9 spacetimes attached to the lion's head were like the 9 destinations for all the desolate beasts to ascend. They separated the different desolate beasts according to their own characteristics, reducing the conflicts between the desolate beasts due to their different natures. As a result, the order between the spacetimes became more stable. Of course, even so, it was impossible for the desolate beasts to be completely stable and peaceful, after all. Although the scale of the battles in each spacetime was limited, battles between different spacetimes still happened from time to time. Between the 9 spacetimes, an unwritten rule of war had been established. Every once in a while, a war would break out. Many of the desolate beasts in each spacetime were fighting for the next war. They were working hard so that their own spacetime could win the next war. As soon as Duan Shi discovered the existence of the spacetime, he instantly understood everything. When he found out that things had developed to this point, even Duan Shi couldn't help but feel speechless. It actually turned out to be like this. Didn't I become the legendary giant elephant that carries the world? No, in their legends, I'm the giant lion that carries the countless worlds. Duan Shi's 9 lion heads revealed a helpless expression as such thoughts flashed through his mind. He didn't expect that his body would instinctively develop to such an extent after being immersed in the spiritual plane for billions of years. He actually replaced the world with his own body, carried countless spacetimes, countless desolate beasts, and became the foundation of the desolate beast's existence. He wanted to change his current state and shake off the many spacetimes attached to his body, but after thinking about it, he couldn't do it in the end. Although it was easy for him to shake off the spacetimes, those spacetimes would definitely not be able to continue existing between the boundless murderous aura and karma. They would definitely be completely destroyed by the murderous aura and karma. At that time, the countless living beings that existed in those spacetimes would definitely be completely destroyed. Even if it was him, it wouldn't be easy to erase billions of living beings in an instant. In this kind of completely unnecessary situation, he naturally wouldn't do such a thing. Of course, it was only in this kind of completely unnecessary situation. If it was really necessary, he wouldn't stop his methods and be stingy with erasing them. As he moved his body slightly, the countless spacetimes began to shake violently. The countless desolate beasts inside were inexplicably terrified and kept roaring. It was as if they thought the end of the world had arrived. Seeing this, Duan could only sigh and stop what he was doing. It seems like my control over my body is still too poor. If I could really control it perfectly, I wouldn't have caused such a huge commotion. With that thought in mind, his 9 lion heads closed their eyes at the same time. The enormous power in his body began to circulate around his body under his will. While nourishing his body, it also deepened his control over his body and power. This action of his did not cause a huge impact like when he moved his body before, but it did not mean that it didn't affect the spacetimes at all. In fact, as he moved, the countless spacetimes that were attached to his body moved slightly. Some of them were in special positions, and they even produced all sorts of indescribable vibrations. However, Duan clearly couldn't do anything about this. After all, he couldn't stop regaining control of his body and power just because of the existence of these spacetimes. After all, no matter what he chose to do next, it was necessary for him to regain control of his body and power. The giant lion has awakened. 9 voices rang out in the 9 spacetimes that were attached to Duan's head at the same time. These were the desolate beasts in despair. That's right, desolate beasts in these spacetimes had already been born with desolate beasts. Moreover, apart from these desolate beasts, the number of false saints was several times more than the desolate beasts. At this moment, it was the desolate beasts among the desolate beasts that discovered an extremely shocking fact through the change in spacetime. The fact that the myriad of worlds were attached to a 9-headed lion was something that any false saint desolate beast would know clearly. And they, who had become false saints, had enough intelligence to understand the meaning of this fact. Even false saints could do it, let alone those desolate beasts. All along, the desolate beasts that knew this clearly knew that the 9-headed lion was in a deep sleep. It was only instinctively trekking aimlessly in the boundless darkness with the myriad of worlds on its back. It had been the same since the birth of the myriad of worlds until billions of years ago. All living beings felt that the 9-headed lion's trekking would continue forever, and in the end, it would bring them to an extremely bright shore. However, now, they suddenly realized that the 9-headed lion, which they thought would be in a deep sleep forever, and was only the cornerstone of the myriad of worlds, had awakened. The intensity of their shock was self-evident. Along with this shock, they began to have all sorts of indescribable worries. The 9-headed lion has awakened. What should we do? Would it destroy the myriad heavens and realms? Will it change its target? Will it directly control the myriad of worlds? Will it? Countless speculations appeared in the hearts of these desolate beasts, making them feel uneasy. However, although they were desolate beasts and were powerful enough to suppress the myriad of worlds, they were merely ants among ants. However, compared to the 9-headed lion, it was merely an ant among ants. In fact, if one wanted to see the overall appearance of the 9-headed lion clearly, they would have to observe it piece by piece in order to regroup it. Under such circumstances, even if they wanted to resist the 9-headed lion, they had no way to do so. I hope things won't develop to the worst state. In the end, the desolate beasts could only pray in their hearts. As their mentality changed, the war between the various spacetimes that was originally agreed upon could no longer continue. After all, compared to the impending doomsday of the myriad of worlds, the conflicts of interests between them were insignificant. Even if they were mentioned, it would be a little disregarding the overall situation. How could they still carry out a war because of this? One by one, the senses of the desolate beasts began to connect with the other desolate beasts. They constantly discussed the possible development of the matter and discussed how to deal with the various disasters that could make them despair just by thinking about it. As they discussed, time passed minute by minute. In the end, they waited for 1,000 years, but the next step of change did not appear. The myriad of worlds still maintained the feeling that allowed them to confirm that the 9-headed lion had come back to life. Other disasters, drastic changes, and possible abnormalities did not occur. If it were not for the fact that these desolate beasts were extremely confident in themselves, they might have thought that what they felt was just an illusion. The myriad of worlds should have existed in such a state. Could it be that it intends to ignore us? One day, thousands of years later, a desolate beast in despair told them a fantasy that they had been waiting for. If you are attached to countless spacetimes and living beings, will you ignore it? Another desolate beast sneered. Chapter 24:12. Time passed slowly in the fear of these wild beast desperators. Unknowingly, another few thousand years had passed. On this day, those wild beast desperators, who had gradually forgotten about the changes of the nine-headed lion due to the long period of time, were suddenly shocked. They broke away from what they were doing and began to spread their senses frantically, trying their best to sense the nine-headed lion. During this process, their senses came into contact with each other, but none of them paid any attention to the others. As for the conflict that would occur when their senses came into contact with each other, there was not even the slightest bit of conflict. Each of them only focused their attention on the nine-headed lion, on the foundation of the universe. After all, they were all despairing ones. Even though the boundless baleful aura and karma of the outside world had a powerful effect on them, causing their senses to be greatly weakened after they were released, they could still sense a large area of the nine-headed lion's body. Through these senses, they soon discovered a horrifying fact. That was, the nine-headed lion had really woken up. The nine-headed lion's eyes, which were many times larger than any spacetime, had already opened. What was revealed was no longer the chaotic and bewildered expression that they had imagined. Instead, it was an unimaginable clarity and wisdom. When their senses came into contact with these eyes, every wild beast desperator could clearly feel that the nine-headed lion had discovered them. They even felt that all their secrets were as clear as the lines on the palm of the nine-headed lion's eyes, not missing a single thing. An unimaginable pressure appeared out of nowhere in the hearts of many wild beast desperators, making them feel that their lives seemed to be out of their control. It was as if some supreme existence had replaced their will and controlled their lives. This kind of feeling was an unbearable experience for ordinary cultivators who had grasped power, let alone for those who had already reached the end of the competition with the many desolate beasts. At this moment, the auras of these desolate beasts exploded. Huge waves began to be generated from their bodies and surged in all directions. In an instant, the place where they were located was razed to the ground. Many of the desolate beasts that served them did not even have the time to scream before they died. All traces of them were completely erased. The spacetime they were in began to shake violently due to the crazy eruption of this aura. It was as if these spacetimes could not withstand this terrifying aura and were about to be completely destroyed. The countless spacetimes attached to the nine-headed lion were incomparably closely connected, faintly forming a huge world. Under such circumstances, the upheaval that occurred in the 9 major spacetimes would naturally spread to many other spacetimes, affecting them and causing them to shake continuously. For a time, terrifying roars came from the various worlds above the 9-headed lion. Various kinds of panic and fear began to emerge continuously, gradually filling the void. It vaguely connected with the boundless ominous chi and karma of the outside world, causing the boundless darkness around the 9-headed lion to shake violently. It was as if there was a strange existence stirring the darkness. At this moment, Duan Shur had already completely woken up. Just like the perception of the wild beast desperators, he had indeed completely discovered the existence of the wild beasts whose perception had extended beyond the spacetime. He had even directly grasped all the secrets of these wild beast desperators in his heart. After all, after nearly 10,000 years of control, he had regained full control of his current body and his current strength. Now that he had full control of his body and strength, the various techniques that he had in his previous life had reappeared. With these various techniques, the power of his divine ability and his strength were tens of thousands of times stronger than ordinary wild beasts. Even if it was the same level as him, a supreme emperor-level wild beast, he would definitely be able to easily crush it with one finger, let alone those wild beasts that were just desperators. He did not even need to take the initiative to deal with such an existence. Just by relying on his instincts, he could already completely subdue the other party and completely understand all the other party's secrets. They have already developed such a perfect civilization? This is already comparable to the monster clan. At the same time, Duan Shi could not help but feel a little emotional in his heart after thoroughly investigating the situation of the so-called universe attached to him. While feeling emotional, his heart suddenly moved. With a change of perspective, in an instant, the appearance of the countless spacetime in his eyes changed completely. Wisps of luck, big and small, directly appeared in his eyes. These providence came from the spacetime itself, the wild beasts in those spacetime, and even the civilization formed by the many wild beasts. These providence were not considered much when compared to a single one. Compared to an ordinary human being's providence, it was not much different. However, when combined together, the providence had undergone various unimaginable changes, turning into a wave that was thousands of times larger than the sum of each small wave. When such a large amount of providence gathered together, it looked like there was a layer of fog that completely covered his huge body. How could the wild beast's providence increase so much? This is even greater than the entire monster clan's providence. Moreover, it looks like its potential is not bad. It is not inferior to the monster clans. Could it be that the wild beasts can also influence the position of the main character of the human world along with the monster clan? A horrifying guess appeared in Duan Shi's mind at this moment. Following this guess, the expressions on his 9 lion heads changed drastically at the same time. Some were surprised, some were panicking, and most of all, they were in disbelief. The surprise and panic were because of the various changes in the wild beast's providence that he saw now. On the other hand, he was in disbelief because of a certain possibility that he had guessed. He was now also a wild beast, and he was the most powerful wild beast that was the foundation of countless wild beasts. If the entire wild beast clan's providence had undergone such a huge increase, what about his providence? Could it be that his providence had also undergone a shocking increase like the wild beast's providence? Moreover, the essence of his providence had completely turned into a wild beast's providence. It was precisely because of this possibility that Duan Shi was in such disbelief. Impossible. How could I be completely assimilated by the wild beasts so easily? How could I completely become a wild beast? This thought appeared out of nowhere in Duan Shi's mind at this moment, causing his emotions to become inexplicably chaotic. However, although his heart rejected it, he had a vague feeling that his guess was probably true. It was also because he knew that his guess was very likely to be true that he lost his composure and had such a strong reaction. If it was an ordinary creature or cultivator, it would naturally be difficult for him to see the providence on his body. However, one should not forget what kind of existence Duan Shi was. He was someone who had a slight understanding of the abstruse concept, and he had been taught by Luo Fan for many years. Whether it was his knowledge or his means, he was much more brilliant than ordinary creatures and cultivators. Under such circumstances, ordinary creatures and cultivators would not be able to clearly see their own providence. However, he had a way to bypass the limitation and see the changes in his providence with his own eyes. Since he felt that it was very likely that his providence would change, and he was extremely resistant to such changes, he naturally would not let go of the opportunity to directly see the changes in himself. At that moment, he calmed his mind, and the huge power in his body began to circulate along an extremely mysterious path in his body. Faintly, a strange pattern that was so complicated that even a desperado would feel dizzy just by looking at it appeared in his body. It was almost like a formation pattern. Following that, His mind joined in and began to slowly adjust his power, slowly adding all kinds of mysterious functions to the pattern that did not originally exist. In the end, after a few years of hard work, he finally completed his entire plan. At the last moment when he completed his plan, the huge pattern began to rapidly emit light, and it spread in all directions. The intensity of the light had reached an unimaginable level, and it even penetrated his flesh, turning the nine-headed lion's body into an almost transparent state. From afar it looked like there were billions of suns piled up together. As for the space-time entities that were attached to the apocalyptic nine-headed lion's body, the change was as if the entire world was suddenly shrouded by an incomparably intense light. Their sight, hearing, touch, and taste were all covered by the light, leaving not a single trace of them remaining. The endless light did not stop there. After it appeared, it gradually swam toward the nine-headed lion's 18 eyes. In the end, it gradually merged with the 18 eyes, making the 18 eyes seem like they had suddenly turned into 18 enormous suns. They began to release an unimaginably terrifying light that penetrated everything and illuminated everything. "Show yourself." A leisurely and clear voice came from the nine-headed lion's nine-mouth. As the 9 lion heads turned, some looked at its own body, some looked above its head, and some looked in all directions. As the heads turned, the scenes in all directions began to enter the nine-headed lion's eyes. In other words, they entered Duan Shi's eyes. Sure enough, his luck has expanded to a level comparable to the ancestral demon. Duan Shi couldn't help but let out a sigh when he saw everything clearly. The last bit of wishful thinking that he had before had completely disappeared. However, through his changed perspective, he could clearly see what he couldn't see before: his own karmic luck. And now, the luck on his body was so vast and dense that it had reached the state when the ancestral demon's luck was at its peak. Seeing this, how could he not understand what was going on? He had obviously become similar to the ancestral demon, the ancestor of the wild beasts. Next, as long as he was willing, he could even lead the wild beasts to compete with the humans and the monster clan for the position of the protagonist of the world. Of course, at the same time, he also had various other options. He could directly destroy the wild beasts and try his best to destroy them. At that time, his identity would naturally be taken away, and he might be able to escape from the identity of a wild beast. However, that was only him. The luck of the wild beasts had already taken shape. Even if he completely destroyed the countless wild beasts that were attached to him, the wild beasts would not disappear completely. The imprints left behind by the wild beasts would definitely be reborn in other mission worlds, allowing the wild beasts to make a comeback after a certain period of time. Who knows, it might even be more powerful than it was now. It might even be more powerful than it was now. The difference was that he could still control the wild beasts now. At that time, he would have no other way to influence the wild beasts other than killing them. It could be said that he had fallen into the dilemma of the demon ancestor back then. It's really difficult. Duan Shi couldn't help but sigh when he sensed his situation. At that very moment, he admired the ancestral demon like never before. Back then, he did not personally experience the ancestral demon's predicament. Although he knew it wasn't easy to make such a decision, he did not admire the ancestral demon. Now that he had personally experienced the ancestral demon's predicament, he finally understood how much determination and courage were needed to make the same decision as the ancestral demon. Even he could not make up his mind at that moment, after struggling for a while, causing the wild beasts in the space-time to feel uneasy. Duan Shi sighed and said, "Since it's heaven's will, let it come." The wild beasts, the humans, and the monster clan existing side by side might be a truly stable structure. As he sighed, bits of his consciousness separated and turned into tiny nine-headed lions that charged into the space-time that was attached to him. Every bit of his consciousness entered a space-time. Not a single space-time was too many, and not a single space-time was left out. Although the bits of consciousness were extremely tiny and insignificant to him, they were absolutely huge. However, its absolute size was definitely impressive. The moment these thoughts rushed into the space-time began to tremble violently. It was as if some behemoth was squeezing into the space-time with great difficulty. For those space-times where there were no true powerhouses, such as false saints and desperation, even if they sensed this change, there was nothing they could do. They could only wait in despair for misfortune to befall them. However, this change was a provocation to the powerful desolate beasts that resided in the space-time. The powerful desolate beasts soared into the sky and charged towards Duan Ji's intent that had been squeezed into the space-time. Chapter 24:13. Although it was just a thought, Duan Shi's current 9-headed lion body was already strong enough to surpass the limits of almost all the wild beasts. Even if it was just a thought, it was enough to suppress the heavens, making all the despairing people feel like they were ants facing a giant in the space-time where the strong wild beasts were resisting him. The thought shook slightly and an overwhelming and terrifying aura swept across the entire space-time, wrapping around the wild beasts that were resisting. As the aura was released and wrapped around them, all the wild beasts completely stopped. Whether it was the wild beasts that were so weak that they were just born, or the wild beasts that were so strong that they were already despairing people, all of them stopped at the same time, even though the difference between the weak wild beasts and the despairing people was billions of times. In front of this vast aura, there was no difference at all between the two. The war that spread across the heavens and realms had completely ended before it even broke out. The final result was obvious. Duan Shi's thought was the final victor, and the many wild beasts in the heavens and realms were all defeated. After using his aura to easily subdue all the wild beasts in the heavens and realms, Duan Shi finally showed himself. The appearance of the 9-headed lion was directly imprinted in the eyes of all the wild beasts in the heavens and realms, engraved into their hearts. When they saw the appearance of the 9-headed lion, most of the wild beasts were extremely shocked, and a sense of respect and obedience was naturally born from the bottom of their hearts. However, the truly strong, or in other words, the cultivators that truly had the mentality of a powerhouse, were different. They had an indescribable feeling of despair, as if their hope of survival had been completely extinguished. The reason for such a difference was actually quite simple. This was because the weak creatures only felt that the supreme existence that supported the heavens and realms in the ancient legends had suddenly walked out from the myths, confirming their belief since they were born, letting them know that the things that they had always believed in were not fake. Naturally, this would make them feel happy. However, the powerhouses were different. To them, the existence of the 9-headed lion was no longer a legend, nor was it a myth, but a fact that they had confirmed a long time ago. In fact, they even had all sorts of pessimistic simulations of what would happen after the 9-headed lion woke up. Under such circumstances, the 9-headed lion appeared in the space they were in such an unstoppable manner, crushing all of them with its vast and unparalleled aura. This was practically their most pessimistic prediction happening right before their eyes. How could they not feel despair? Duan Shi did not pay much attention to the changes in the crowd's emotions. In any case, as long as he made things clear, everything would no longer be a problem. At that moment, his many thoughts spoke at the same time. Dire beasts have two great enemies. One is the human race, the other is the demon race. My awakening will be accompanied by the discovery of our existence by these two great enemies. His words carried a tremendous pressure that spread across the universe. It shook the minds of all the wild beasts and made them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. He would not ignore the content of Shiji's words just because he did not know about the human race and the demon race. Duan Shi did not hesitate when he saw their attitude. He continued to instigate them and described the situation of the dire beasts as extremely dangerous. It was as if the dire beasts would be annihilated in the next moment if they did not take the initiative to deal with it. Even if they did not have much of a concept of the dire beasts as a whole, all the dire beasts still became nervous when they heard Shurji's description. After all, the existence of the dire beasts did not mean much to the dire beasts. However, if the dire beasts were to be annihilated, there was a high chance that they would be annihilated along with them. This was something that they could not accept. Therefore, as Duan Shur described the situation they were in, many of the dire beasts began to feel nervous. Their desire to survive gradually suppressed the conflict and hatred between them. All of them looked at the nine-headed lion with anticipation, hoping to get some advice from the nine-headed lion. Seeing that almost every dire beast's fighting spirit had been aroused, Duan Shur nodded and said, "The world is vast and boundless. Aside from the universe, there are also countless worlds shrouded in boundless darkness. In those worlds there are also dire beasts. Those dire beasts are also our compatriot. Now they are doing their best to resist the attacks of the humans and the monster race. We cannot sit back and watch as they are attacked and annihilated. Once they are annihilated, it will be our turn next. Therefore, the first thing we need to do is to support them. Help them." Duan Shur's words were naturally quite ordinary, but he was just too strong. This power made it so that even a fart from him could resonate strongly with all living beings. Under such circumstances, the content of what he said easily entered the hearts of all the wild beasts, causing them to involuntarily agree with his words. They directly followed his train of thought and unknowingly came to the conclusion that they had to do everything they could to support their compatriots in the boundless world in the boundless darkness. "Your Honor, please tell us what we should do," one of the desperate beasts asked. An extremely strong fighting spirit appeared on his face. The aura around him surged and it even vaguely stirred the aura released by Duan Shur's will that existed in this space-time. Hearing this, Duan Shur only smiled and said, "Of course, the first thing is to find those worlds." As he spoke, Duan Shur's nine-headed lion body turned slightly and suddenly accelerated in a certain direction. Compared to his previous life where he was confined to the mission world and the public space, although he felt quite uncomfortable being reborn as a dire beast in this life, he also obtained a lot of benefit. Among them, the biggest benefit was that he was no longer confined to any world. He could freely move about in the boundless ominous aura and karma around this world. It was only natural that he could freely move about and sense the various worlds in the boundless ominous aura and karma. At this moment, he sensed the existence of a mission world in a certain direction not far from him. That mission world quietly floated in the boundless ominous aura and karma, slowly absorbing the ominous aura and karma. Looking from afar, it looked like a dim star in the void of the universe. The nine-headed lion's speed wasn't too fast, but due to its unimaginably huge size, even if it wasn't too big, it would only take an instant for it to cross this distance and arrive at the mission world. When the nine-headed lion appeared in front of the mission world, many dire beasts in the various worlds had not even digested the content of Duan Shur's will. "What is this?" An extremely huge world instantly appeared in the perception of the powerful dire beasts that could sense beyond the space-time. The size of that world was naturally insignificant when compared to the nine-headed lion, but when compared to the worlds attached to the nine-headed lion's body, it was incomparably huge. Even if the 9 largest spacetimes that existed on the 9 heads were combined, they were not even half the size of that world. What a huge world! Is this the world in the darkness? How can it be so huge? How many worlds like this are there in the darkness? 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000? The experts were filled with shock, and they could not control themselves. There are countless worlds like this in the darkness. Some of them are even billions of times bigger than this world. At this moment, the nine-headed lion in the various worlds explained at the same time. Hearing this, the dire beasts that could sense this world were even more shocked. As for the dire beasts that could not sense beyond the spacetime, although they could not see the situation in the outside world with their own eyes, Just listening to Duan Shi's description was enough to give them a huge shock. However, in the midst of this shock, they were even more curious. They were curious about how huge and shocking that world was. In the past, if Duan Shi wanted to connect the two mission worlds, he would have to rely on the rules of the giant tower itself, and the rewards he obtained from the giant tower after completing the mission. However, the situation now was obviously completely different. Now that he was outside the world, he could even see the appearance of the mission worlds with his own eyes. In this way, if he wanted to connect to the mission world, he could directly do it, and there would no longer be any difficulty. At this moment, with a thought, a strand of hair emitted a sound that shook the boundless murderous aura and karma in the surroundings and broke off from his body. After the strand of hair was cut off, it slowly floated up. One end directly penetrated into the space-time above one of his heads, while the other end quickly spread out and arrived in front of the extremely narrow world in front of him. Then, it violently penetrated into that world. Crack, 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 crack. At this moment, the sound of breaking and shattering kept coming from the space-time above his head and the world in front of him. Following this shattering sound, the two space-times broke at the same time, allowing the two ends of the strand of hair to rush into them. At this moment, the living beings in this space-time and that world were extremely shocked. This strand of hair in Duan Shi's eyes was only a strand of hair on his body, but in the eyes of the living beings in the space-time and the other world, it was as huge as a terrifying mountain. When the strand of hair penetrated that world and space-time, it felt like an indomitable mountain range had fiercely crashed into the barrier of his own world, shattering the barrier and creating a huge hole, allowing the mountain range to smash in. It went without saying that such a huge thing had caused a huge commotion when it rushed in with such momentum. At this moment, the space-time of the two worlds began to violently shake. The chaos of the laws and laws had reached a certain peak, making people wonder if the two worlds would collapse just by being poked by this strand of hair. What is this? No matter which of the two worlds it was, hysterical cries of horror came from Duan Shi. Amidst these cries, powerful living beings rushed into the sky one by one, charging towards the mountain range that had smashed through the barrier of the other worlds, wanting to beat the mountain range back. Follow this passage and you can enter that world. Then you can help our compatriots in that world. At this moment, Duan Jie's voice reverberated through the countless worlds attached to him. Any of the wild beasts could hear his voice clearly and understand what the tunnel he was referring to. Although the strand of hair only connected the space-time attached to his head, it only established a passage between that space-time and the other world. However, due to the close connection between the countless spacetimes attached to his body, passages also appeared in other spacetimes at the same time. Each of these passages was essentially a projection of this strand of hair. Upon entering these passages, one would first arrive at the real hair by following the connections between the various spacetimes in the various worlds, and then through the hair to the world in front of them. Invasion. My mission didn't say that this mission world would be invaded. In that world, a quasi-sage cultivator stared at the mountain range that had suddenly smashed through the world, his eyes filled with disbelief. This cultivator was none other than the human who had been carrying out the mission issued by the giant tower in this mission world. On the other side of this world, in the territory of the demon race, dozens of demons were also staring at the huge mountain range above them in shock. They had set off from the public space of the demon race, or rather, they had set off from the immortal world of the demon race to come to this world to help their compatriots in this world. The battle between the demon race and the humans in this world had lasted for tens of millions of years. In this battle, both sides had about a 50-50 chance of winning. Neither side was able to suppress the other, but neither side was willing to give up. It could be said that at this moment the human race and the demon race in this mission world were in a stalemate. In this world, apart from the human race and the demon race, there were many other strange races. Strictly speaking, these races were also considered wild beasts. However, whether it was their appearance or strength, they were slightly different from real wild beasts. These were the targets that Duan sure wanted to save at this time. For our compatriots, kill. At this moment, a loud roar suddenly came from the center of the mountain range, shaking the void around the mountain range, causing circles of ripples to form.